Hello guys, welcome to Watch Harry. Today we have an incredible story for you. Harry rejected Sorting Hat's Gryffindor choice and publicly declared courtship to Daphne Greengrass at age 11. If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The boy who chose the train lurched forward with a sound like a giant clearing its throat, and Harry Potter pressed his face against the cold glass and watched the platform dissolve into steam and brick and then, finally, open countryside. He'd never left London before. Not really. Day trips didn't count, and those had only happened when the Dursleys couldn't find a convincing excuse to leave him locked in his cupboard without someone noticing. But this was different. The city fell away like a shed skin, and Harry felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't even known was tight. He sat back, pulled his knees up, and looked at his reflection in the window. Messy black hair. Round glasses with a crack in the left lens that he'd fixed twice with tape and twice watched snap again. Two big clothes that had belonged to Dudley 3 summers ago. He looked, he thought, exactly like what he was, a kid who'd grown up in a cupboard, who'd never had anything that was properly his, who'd found out 6 weeks ago that the world was larger and stranger than he'd been allowed to imagine. He also looked, he thought, like someone who was about to make a choice. The compartment door slid open. A boy with a round face and dirt on his left shoe stumbled in, clutching a toad to his chest with both hands. "Sorry," the boy said. "Have you seen a toad?" "He keeps, oh, I've got him, never mind." He looked down at the toad, then at Harry, then back at the toad with the expression of someone who had been having a very long day since approximately 6 in the morning. "I'm Neville. Neville Longbottom. Harry Potter." Neville sat down hard. The toad made a sound of protest. "Oh," Neville said. "Right. Yes." He seemed to decide something. "I won't make a fuss about it." "Thanks." Harry meant it. Neville tucked the toad, Trevor, he explained, a birthday gift from his great-uncle that he'd been losing and finding in rotation for 3 weeks, into his pocket and sat back with the slightly stunned expression of someone who had exceeded their own social expectations. They talked, haltingly at first and then more easily, about what they knew of Hogwarts, which for Neville was extensive family testimony and for Harry was one very dense book he'd read twice on the train to King's Cross. "My gran says Gryffindor," Neville said. "My whole family's been Gryffindor. My dad, my mum," he stopped. Something went quiet behind his eyes. "It's sort of expected." "What do you think?" Harry asked. Neville blinked as though the question was in a language he was still learning. I don't know. I've never really thought about what I think." Harry nodded. He understood that very well. The compartment door opened again, this time without a knock or an apology. 2 girls. One with bushy brown hair and an air of organized authority, wearing her robes already pressed and buttoned despite it being roughly 10 in the morning, one with white blonde hair and a stillness to her that made Harry think of a chess piece, specifically a queen, specifically the kind that could move anywhere on the board and usually was. "Have either of you seen a toad?" the first girl asked. "A boy named Neville is looking." "I'm Neville," said Neville. "Oh, good." She sat down as though she'd been invited. "I'm Hermione Granger. I've read all the course books twice. Most of them 3 times. Have you practiced any spells?" "I've managed Lumos already, though my wand control on the second girl had not sat down. She was standing in the doorway with the particular quality of someone who had accompanied a friend on an errand and was waiting for it to conclude. Her eyes moved around the compartment with a slow, assessing calm, over Neville, over Hermione, and then they settled on Harry and paused there. "Daphne Greengrass," she said. Not an introduction, exactly. More like a statement of fact. "Harry Potter," Harry said, the same way. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise, she'd clearly already known, the way everyone seemed to already know, but something more like recalibration. Like she'd had a set of numbers in her head and he'd just handed her a different equation. "I know," she said. "I know you know." He tilted his head slightly. "You going to sit down or stand there?" She sat down. Not beside Hermione, who was now telling Neville about Wingardium Leviosa with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting their whole life to have this conversation, but across from Harry, near the window. She pulled out a book. It was, Harry noticed, not a school book. It had a dark green cover and a title in silver letters, Foundations of Wizarding Contract Law. She opened it without looking at him again. Harry watched her read for a moment. Then he looked back out the window. The countryside was very green. He hadn't known it could be so green. "Your family's old wizarding," he said. Not a question. "Yes." She didn't look up. "Mine too, apparently. On my mum's side it gets complicated, but on my dad's side it goes back a long way." He paused. "I've been reading about it." Now she looked up. "Have you?" 6 weeks, he said. "I found out 6 weeks ago that magic was real. I read everything I could get my hands on." He said it without apology or performance, just as a fact. The history. The politics. The social structures. The old families. He met her eyes. "House Greengrass is one of the sacred 28. "It is," she said carefully. "And you're on the train alone. Your parents didn't come to the platform." Her expression didn't change, which was itself an expression. "My father had business in Brussels." "Right." Harry looked back out the window. "How's the book?" A pause. "Informative." "Which section?" Another pause, longer this time. She looked down at the page, then back up at him. "Declarative bonds and their historical precedents." Harry nodded slowly. He had, in point of fact, read Foundations of Wizarding Contract Law. He'd found a copy in Flourish and Blots, on a shelf so high he'd needed to use a stepping stool, wedged between a book on goblin trade agreements and something called the Annotated History of Portkey Regulation. He'd bought it on instinct and read it in the back of Gringotts while a goblin with extraordinary eyebrows processed his vault withdrawal. He didn't say any of this. What he said was, "The section on declaratory courtship is interesting." Daphne Greengrass put her book down very carefully on her knee. "Yes," she said. "It is. Old law," Harry said. "Pre-ministry. Still technically valid." "Technically. Publicly made, publicly witnessed, magically binding in intent if not in immediate contract." He looked at her. "Gives the declared party full social protection under the old codes. Any approach, social pressure, or arrangement made against the declared parties will becomes a violation of the declarer's house rights." Daphne looked at him for a long moment. The train swayed gently. Outside, a river appeared and disappeared. "You've done a lot of reading," she said, "for someone who found out magic existed 6 weeks ago." "I had a lot of catching up to do," Harry said. Hermione, who had paused her explanation to Neville mid-sentence, was now staring at Harry with an expression that was equal parts fascination and calculation. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "Nothing yet," Harry said. But he looked at Daphne, and she looked at him, and something passed between them that was not yet trust, not yet understanding, but was at least the acknowledgement that they were both, in their very different ways, people who had spent a long time learning to read a room. "You're going to do something at the sorting," she said. Very quiet. Almost not a question. "Maybe," Harry said. She picked up her book again. But she didn't turn the page. They changed into robes somewhere past Birmingham, and Hermione corrected Neville's collar, and a boy with a snub nose and a sweet trolley tried to sell them every variation of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans before concluding they were a poor investment, and the sky outside went from green-gray to the particular dark purple of a summer evening turning into night. Harry ate a chocolate frog and kept the card. Dumbledore. He looked at the long silver beard and the half-moon spectacles and thought about the letter that had been addressed to Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, and about the fact that someone, somewhere, had known exactly where he slept and had done nothing about it for 10 years. He put the card in his pocket. Draco Malfoy arrived at the compartment door somewhere around Scotland, flanked by 2 large boys who served roughly the same architectural purpose as columns, decorative support, structurally redundant. He looked at Harry with the particular expression of someone who had practiced an entrance. "I'm Malfoy," he said. "Draco Malfoy." Harry looked at him, then at the 2 boys behind him, then back at Draco. "I know who you are." Draco blinked. That wasn't the response he'd prepared for. "Right. Well. I wanted to, I thought I'd introduce myself, seeing as we'll probably be in the same house." "Probably," Harry said. "Slytherin," Draco said, with the confidence of someone announcing a destination he'd already booked. "Both our families have strong Slytherin connections. I thought it made sense to, well, establish things early." His eyes moved to Daphne and his expression shifted into something more formal, more careful. "Greengrass." "Malfoy," Daphne said. The word was a closed door. Draco's eyes moved back to Harry. "You should know," he said, "that in Slytherin, who you associate with matters. Blood matters. Standing matters." He glanced at Neville and Hermione with the precision of someone filing information under the correct category. "Not everyone is, Malfoy," Harry said. Draco stopped. "I've read about your family too," Harry said. He said it pleasantly, the way you'd mention the weather. "Interesting history. Very interesting last few years, specifically." He let that sit in the air for exactly 2 seconds. "I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about at school." Draco's expression went through 3 distinct states in rapid succession: confusion, comprehension, and a very carefully managed version of offense. He looked at Harry with new eyes, recalculating. Harry could see it, the same way Daphne had but with a different quality, less curiosity, more wariness. "Right," Draco said. "Yes. Well. We'll see how the sorting goes." He straightened his robes. "Good evening." He left. His columns left with him. Neville exhaled. I've heard about his family. He's scared," Harry said. "Just not of the right things yet." Hermione was looking at Harry with the expression she'd been building since the courtship law conversation. "Who are you?" she said, and it was so earnest and direct that Harry almost laughed. "I'm not sure yet," he said honestly. "But I'm working on it." Hogwarts, when they finally saw it across the Black Lake, was not what Harry had expected. He'd expected impressive. He'd expected large. He hadn't expected the way it sat in the landscape, like it had grown there, like it was a natural feature of the dark hillside, like the lake and the mountains and the castle were one single thing that had always been and would always be. He stood in the bow of Hagrid's boat. Hagrid had found him on the platform and swept him up with an enthusiasm that was entirely genuine and slightly terrifying, and looked at the lights in the castle windows and felt, for the first time in his life, the specific sensation of arriving somewhere. Not visiting. Not passing through. Arriving. "All right, Harry?" Hagrid asked, from somewhere above and behind him. "Yeah," Harry said. And meant it completely. The boats bumped against the dock. They climbed stone steps slicked with spray, and the castle doors opened, and a woman with her hair in a severe bun and an expression of general command looked at them all with the measuring gaze of someone calculating variables. "Professor McGonagall," Harry murmured, more to himself than anyone. "Indeed," she said, looking directly at him, because of course she'd heard. "Mr. Potter. Welcome to Hogwarts." Her expression was not cold, exactly, but it was careful. Like she'd thought about this moment and still wasn't sure how to hold it. "Welcome, all of you. In a few moments, you will be sorted." The ceremony is important. The house you are placed in will be your family for the next 7 years. Conduct yourselves accordingly. She looked over them all once more. Follow me. The great hall was, objectively, extraordinary. Hundreds of candles floating in a ceiling that wasn't a ceiling but a perfect reflection of the night sky outside, for long tables lit with golden light, 500 students turning to watch them file in, and at the head of the room a table of teachers and one empty chair. No, Harry corrected himself. One chair with an absent quality, the particular kind of empty that meant someone usually sat there. Quirrell was already at the table, purple turban and all. He was looking at something near the door, his eyes moving with a restlessness that seemed less like anxiety and more like searching. Harry filed in with the others and looked straight ahead. The sorting hat was a battered, patched thing that sat on a stool and looked like it had seen civilizations rise and fall and found the whole business mildly tiresome. When it began to sing, the hall went quiet, and Harry listened to every word. The song was about the 4 founders. About bravery and cunning and wisdom and loyalty. About how the hat could read your mind and find what lived in your heart and place you where you belonged. Harry thought, what if where you belong isn't where they put you? He watched the sorting begin. Names were called alphabetically. Bones, Susan, Hufflepuff. The Hufflepuff table cheered. Boot, Terry, Ravenclaw. Harry watched each student sit, watched the hat drop over their eyes, watched the moment of stillness and then the declaration. Draco Malfoy didn't even sit for 2 seconds. Slytherin. The hat had barely touched his head. Harry noticed Daphne, near the middle of the line, standing very still. She had the same quality she'd had on the train, that chess-piece stillness, but Harry thought he could see, in the set of her jaw, the faint tension of someone waiting for something they couldn't control. Granger, Hermione, Gryffindor. The red and gold table erupted. Hermione sat down with the expression of someone who had expected this but was still pleased to have the confirmation. Greengrass, Daphne, Harry watched. The hat sat on her head for longer than it had for Draco. She sat very still. Then, Slytherin. And she walked to the table with the composure of someone who had prepared themselves for every outcome and shown nothing about which one they'd wanted. Harry's name was next in his head, a few letters down. He counted. Longbottom, Neville. The hat thought for a while, a long while, and then said Gryffindor, and Neville walked to the table looking like he wasn't entirely sure his legs belonged to him. And then, Potter, Harry. The hall went silent. Not the polite silence of the sorting but a deeper silence, a collective held breath. Harry walked forward and felt 500 pairs of eyes on him and let them be there. He sat on the stool. He picked up the sorting hat with both hands, which apparently no one had done before because he heard a faint surprised sound from the direction of the staff table, and he put it on his own head and waited. The hat's voice arrived not as sound but as a presence, a thought inside his own thoughts. Well, it said. This is interesting. I haven't been picked up like that in several decades. Most students wait for me to be placed. I wasn't sure you were going to fall, Harry thought back. I never fall, the hat said, with the faint indignation of something ancient and proud. Now then. Let me see what we have here. Harry felt it then, a sensation like fingers moving through water, except the water was his own memory. The cupboard under the stairs. The way he'd learned to read Aunt Petunia's mood from the sound her footsteps made. The calculations he'd run every morning of his life. Is it a good day or a bad day? How much space can I take up? What is the cost of being noticed? The books he'd read in the library at school because the library was warm and free and no one could tell him to stop. The 6 weeks since Hagrid, the furious hungry reading, the Gringotts vault and the weight of everything that had been waiting for him. The hat said. You know, I don't often see this in an 11-year-old. What? Patience, it said. Real patience. Not the patience of someone who is mild, but the patience of someone who is waiting for the right moment. A pause. You do well in Gryffindor. The bravery is there. Considerable bravery, actually, though I suspect you'd call it something else. Stubbornness, perhaps. Perhaps. But there's the cunning. The planning. The reading of rooms and people. The hat's presence shifted, turned, examined something. And the ambition. Not for wealth or status, you don't particularly care about either. But you want to understand. You want to be in the place where the most information lives, where the most happens, where you can learn what you need to learn and become what you intend to become. Another pause. Do you know what you intend to become? Not yet, Harry thought. But I'm going to find out. Slytherin would serve you well, the hat said. Gryffindor would also serve you well, in different ways. The courage is genuine. Either house could hold you. Then I choose, Harry thought. The hat was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. You know, it said, in 900 years, very few students have understood that the choice was theirs. They've argued with me. They've begged. But you're not arguing or begging. You simply know. I've spent my whole life having choices made for me, Harry thought. I'm done with that. Yes, the hat said softly. I can see that. And then, with something that wasn't quite approval but was in that neighborhood, choose, then. Slytherin, Harry thought. And I want it loud. The hat lifted off his head, and Harry put it back on the stool himself, and stood up, and in the great hall of Hogwarts, in front of 500 students and the entire faculty, the Sorting Hat said, in the voice that filled every corner of that stone room, Slytherin. The Slytherin table erupted. Harry heard it, the cheer, the banging of hands on wood, the general celebration of having claimed the famous Harry Potter, and he let them have 2 seconds of it. Then he did not walk to the Slytherin table. He stood in the center of the great hall and looked at the Slytherin table and found Daphne Greengrass, who was sitting 3 seats in from the near end, very still, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. He walked toward the Slytherin table. The cheering was still happening. People were moving to make room for him, assuming he was heading for the seat being waved into near Draco, but Harry walked past it without looking at it, walked past 4 more students who were sliding aside in confusion, and stopped in front of the seat beside Daphne Greengrass. The hall had gone quiet again. The particular quality of quiet that means everyone is watching. Harry put his hand on the table. It was a formal gesture, he'd read about it, the old way, the way that carried weight in the old codes. Not a dramatic gesture, not a performance, just a hand flat on the table, a declaration of position. He looked at Daphne. She was looking back at him. Something had moved in her expression, not fear, not exactly, but the rapid interior movement of someone recalibrating very fast. He said, clearly enough to carry, not shouting but projecting the way he'd learned to when he needed to be heard, Daphne Greengrass. I'm Harry Potter. I declare courtship interest and formal protection under the old codes, publicly witnessed. He held her eyes. You don't have to say yes. But you're under my protection either way, unless you refuse it. The silence in the great hall was absolute. Even the floating candles seemed to have paused. Then, from the staff table, someone knocked over a goblet, and the sound of it falling was very loud. Daphne looked at him for 5 full seconds. Harry counted them. Her expression moved through a sequence of things that he suspected very few people ever saw on her face: shock, calculation, something that might have been the precursor to anger, something else that might have been the distant cousin of relief. Then it went still and smooth again, and she said, "You're 11 years old." "So are you," Harry said. "The old codes are not commonly invoked." "No," Harry agreed. "But they're valid. People will have opinions about this." "They already have opinions about me," Harry said. "At least now some of those opinions will be useful." Another pause. Harry waited. He was, the hat had noted, patient. "Sit down, Potter," Daphne said. You're causing a scene." "I'm aware," Harry said, and sat. The Great Hall did not return to normal for several minutes. McGonagall called the sorting back to order with the crispness of someone who had been in charge of difficult situations for 30 years and was not going to allow one 11-year-old to derail a tradition, but Harry could feel the conversations happening in low voices at every table, could see heads turning, could see Dumbledore at the head of the staff table with his hands folded and an expression that, from a distance, looked like someone privately having a thought they were not going to share. At the Gryffindor table, Hermione Granger had turned fully in her seat to stare. Neville was beside her, looking stunned, and then, gradually, something approaching delighted. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was very still. Harry could see it in his peripheral vision, the stillness of someone containing something large and not entirely in control of it. Beside Harry, Daphne picked up her goblet and drank from it. Her hand was perfectly steady. "I read the same book," she said quietly. "Just for him." "I know," Harry said. "You didn't tell me what you were planning. I thought you'd try to talk me out of it." She was quiet for a moment. "I would have," she said. "You're very strange, Potter." "Probably," Harry agreed. She set her goblet down. On her other side, a girl with dark hair and bright eyes was staring at Harry with the expression of someone witnessing a natural phenomenon, present, astonished, possibly composing the retelling in her head already. "Tracy Davis," the girl said, extending a hand past Daphne. "Her best friend." Current state, absolutely bewildered. "What in the name of Merlin?" Later, Daphne said. "You're telling me everything," Tracy said. Later, Daphne said again, but there was something in her voice that wasn't quite its normal temperature, a small warmth, so controlled it was almost invisible, the kind that suggested that later was a promise and not a dismissal. Dumbledore stood for the welcome speech, and Harry listened with his chin resting in his hand, watching the old man speak. Twinkling eyes. Kind face. Benevolent smile. The voice of a grandfather telling you everything was going to be fine. Harry thought about the cupboard under the stairs. About Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs. About 10 years of that address on a letter that had never been opened because no one had been there to open it. He thought about the letter being addressed to a cupboard and the man standing behind that podium knowing about it and choosing, year after year, to leave it alone. He applauded with the rest of the hall when the speech ended. His hands hit each other at the right intervals. His face did the right things. But he was filing information, categorizing, building a picture. The feast appeared, and the wonder of it briefly pushed everything else aside, because Harry had never, not once in his life, sat in front of food like this. Not just the amount of it but the variety, the color, the smell. He put food on his plate and ate it, and it was the most straightforward moment of joy he had in an otherwise complicated day. "You're actually eating," Tracy observed. "I was hungry," Harry said. "You just performed the most dramatic sorting ceremony I've ever heard described in 4 generations of family dinner table stories, and you're thinking about chicken. Roast potatoes, actually." Harry gestured at the dish. "They're excellent. Do you want some?" Tracy stared at him. Then she held out her plate. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I do." Daphne, between them, said nothing, but she accepted roast potatoes as well when the dish was passed, and that, Harry thought, was something. After the feast, the prefects led them through the castle, down, down, down past the entrance hall and the stairs and the paintings, who watched with too attentive eyes, deeper into the stone, into the cool air that tasted of underground water and old magic. The Slytherin common room was reached through a stone wall that responded to a password muttered by the 5th-year prefect, and when it swung open, Harry stepped through into a long, low room lit by greenish lamps, with curved stone walls and windows that looked out into the black depths of the lake. It was beautiful, in the way that deep things are beautiful, a little cold, a little alien, entirely itself. Harry stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at it. In one of the black lake windows, something large and pale moved past and was gone. "It grows on you," said a voice beside him. Tracy Davis, falling into step naturally as the rest of the first years filed past. "Or so I've been told. My aunt was Slytherin." "I like it already," Harry said. "You would?" She looked at him sideways. "Are you going to tell me what the plan is? Because I want to know if I'm sleeping in the same dormitory as someone who's either very clever or absolutely mental, and I feel I have a right to prepare myself." Harry considered this. "Both, probably," he said. Tracy nodded seriously. "Fair enough." At the far side of the common room, Draco Malfoy was speaking in low, urgent tones to Crabbe and Goyle, his eyes moving to Harry at intervals. Harry let him look. He crossed the room without hurry, found a chair by one of the lake windows, and sat in it. A prefect was explaining dormitory assignments and common room rules with the brisk efficiency of someone running through a script. Harry half listened. More than half watched. The Slytherin common room was a landscape of political geography made physical, where people sat, who they sat near, what body language said about allegiances. Harry was mapping it in the same methodical way he'd once mapped the Dursleys' house, which rooms were safe, which weren't, who moved in patterns and who moved unpredictably. Daphne sat with Tracy on a low sofa near the fire. She had her book out, not the contract law book now but a defense text, and she was reading without appearing to read, which Harry recognized because he did it too. Pansy Parkinson was beside Draco, saying something that made him shake his head once, sharply. Pansy looked at Harry and her expression was the particular calculation of someone deciding whether someone was a threat or an opportunity. A boy with a pale, sharp face and careful eyes was sitting alone near the bookshelf, Blaise Zabini, Harry noted, who had been sorted before the general chaos and who had watched Harry's declaration with an expression of such complete and undisturbed interest that he hadn't seemed to blink for approximately 90 seconds. After the prefect's speech ended and the first-year boys were being directed toward their dormitory, Draco stepped in front of Harry. He'd had time to compose himself. The stillness Harry had noticed at dinner was gone, replaced by a performance of ease. "That was quite something, Potter," Draco said. "In the Great Hall." "Thank you," Harry said. "I'm not sure it was a compliment." "I know," Harry said. Draco's composure flickered. He was quick, Harry noted, quick to read a room, quick to adjust. He'd be excellent at this game if he hadn't been raised to think the game was already won. "You should know," Draco said, "that in this house, certain alliances are more valuable than others. Greengrass has been spoken for in certain circles since she was 7. Her family has arrangements. What you did tonight was legal," Harry said. "Under the old codes. Which predate and supersede private family arrangements not filed as formal betrothals." He met Draco's eyes. "I've read about that too." Draco stared at him. "Is there anything else?" Harry asked pleasantly. A muscle moved in Draco's jaw. "We'll talk more," he said. "When you understand how things work here." "Looking forward to it," Harry said, and walked past him to the dormitory door. The dormitory was a long stone room with 5 four-poster beds with green and silver curtains. Harry's trunk was at the end of the room. He sat on the edge of his bed and looked at his hands for a moment. The day had been a lot. He was 11 years old and he had chosen his house and declared public courtship to a girl he'd spoken to for 4 hours and told the son of a Death Eater that he'd done his reading and picked a fight with everyone who was going to try to move him around like a piece on a board. He was not afraid of any of it. He examined this, turning it over, checking whether it was true or whether he was telling himself it was true because the alternative was worse. But no, he was not afraid. He was awake. He was present. He felt like a key in the right lock. He opened his trunk, moved aside the robes and the textbooks, and pulled out a slim volume that he'd bought at Flourish and Blots on Hagrid's somewhat bewildered recommendation, A Young Wizard's Guide to the Old Codes, which was cheerfully written and completely serious in its content and which had given him the idea for tonight somewhere around chapter 4. He dog-eared the page. He read it again now, quickly, confirming that he'd got it right. The declaratory courtship, the page read, is one of the oldest forms of formal social contract in wizarding tradition. Unlike betrothal, which requires family consent and formal registration, the declaratory courtship requires only public witness, magical intent, and the words of formal declaration. Once made, the declaration places the named party under the social protection of the declarer's house, nullifying any existing informal arrangements, though not formally registered contracts. The declared party may accept, refuse, or hold the declaration in abeyance. In abeyance means the protection stands but the courtship is neither confirmed nor denied. Harry had, he thought, a fairly strong suspicion about which of those three options Daphne Greengrass was going to choose. He turned off the lamp beside his bed and lay back. On the other side of the room, Crabbe was already snoring. Goyle sounded like a small avalanche. Blaise Zabini's curtains were drawn. From the gap under the door came the faint green light of the common room lamps and the sound of the lake, very soft, the deep dark water moving against the castle foundations, an ancient and indifferent sound. Harry listened to it and thought about the year ahead. He thought about the Mirror of Ariste, which he'd read about in a history text, not about the mirror specifically, but about objects of deep enchantment, objects that showed you something true. He thought about Quirrell and the wrong quality he'd had at dinner, the searching eyes, the too studied movements. He thought about Dumbledore's face when the hat had called Slytherin and Harry had made his declaration, that folded hands expression, not quite unreadable, because Harry had been reading expressions his whole life, and what it read was, "This is unexpected, and I'm not sure how to account for it yet." Good, Harry thought. Good. He pulled his curtains closed. In the dark, with the sounds of the lake around him and the green light coming through the gaps and his dormitory mates breathing in their separate sleeping rhythms, Harry Potter closed his eyes. He had chosen. Now the work began. In the morning, when the first-year Slytherins assembled in the common room for the prefect's tour to breakfast, Daphne Greengrass fell into step beside Harry without looking at him. They walked in silence through the dungeons, up toward the great hall, morning light beginning to come through the upper windows. "I've decided," she said, when they were half a corridor from the hall. Tracy was ahead of them, explaining something to a confused-looking second year with great authority. Draco was behind, not close enough to hear. Harry looked at her. Her expression was its usual composed surface but there was something moving behind her eyes. "Abeyance," she said. Harry nodded. "All right. The protection stands." "Yes. The courtship is not confirmed." She paused. "Not yet." Harry looked straight ahead at the open doors of the great hall, at the morning light pouring through, at the 1,000 students already sitting at their tables and the smell of breakfast reaching all the way down the corridor. "Not yet," he agreed. And that, for now, was enough. Chapter 2, Ice and Green Fire. The first morning at Hogwarts arrived with the particular cruelty of all first mornings in new places, too early, too loud, and entirely indifferent to the fact that Harry had stayed awake until past midnight listening to the lake and thinking. He was up before anyone else. He dressed in the dark, navigating the dormitory by memory the way he'd learned to navigate the Dursleys' house, quietly, efficiently, without bumping into anything. He took his copy of Hogwarts, a history and his defense textbook and went out into the common room before the green lamps had even begun their slow morning brightening. The common room was empty except for one person. Daphne Greengrass was sitting in the chair nearest the largest lake window, feet tucked under her, already dressed, reading Foundations of Wizarding Contract Law with a cup of tea that must have materialized from somewhere Harry hadn't located yet. The greenish light from the lake moved across her face in slow patterns. Outside the window, the water was the color of dark glass. She didn't look up when he came in. Harry got himself a chair, moved it to a reasonable distance, close enough to talk, far enough to not be invasive, and opened his defense text to the chapter on basic shielding theory. They sat in silence for 20 minutes. It was, Harry thought, a surprisingly comfortable silence. The kind that didn't require filling. "There's a kettle," Daphne said, without looking up. "Behind the bookshelf on the left. Second years showed me last night." Harry found it. The tea was already made, still hot, which he suspected was a small enchantment. He poured a cup and came back and sat down again. "The protection clause," Daphne said, still looking at her book. "Under the old codes. If someone violates it, what happens?" "Technically," Harry said, "their family owes mine reparations. Social censure under the old family's agreement. And I'm allowed to respond formally, which in the old codes means a duel by proxy or in person, the injured party's choice." Daphne turned a page. "And if it's a minor family matter? Something social. An unwanted arrangement, say. Pressure from a third party. I invoke the protection. They back off." Harry looked at his tea. "Or they don't, and then I invoke it harder. You're very calm about this. Should I be upset?" She looked up then, and looked at him properly for the first time that morning. The assessment in her eyes was not unfriendly, it was simply very direct, the way that someone looks at something when they're deciding what category it belongs in and finding that none of the existing categories quite fit. "Most people your age," she said, "are thinking about their first classes and whether their friends are eating breakfast." "I don't have friends yet," Harry said. "I have a declaration in abeyance, a dormitory of people who are either afraid of me or politically opposed to me, and a schedule that starts with transfiguration." He paused. "And the tea is good." Daphne looked at him for another moment. Then she went back to her book, but the corner of her mouth moved in a way that she controlled before it became anything expressible. "The Malfoy family," she said, "had a private arrangement with my father. Nothing registered, nothing formal. A preliminary discussion about a future contract. For your betrothal," Harry said. "When I turned 14. Her voice was even. "My father considers it advantageous. The Malfoys consider it a reasonable alliance." She turned another page. "I consider it a transaction in which I am the currency." Harry said nothing for a moment, because there was nothing to say to that was adequate. He thought about what it meant to be 11 years old and already have the shape of your life decided by someone else's negotiation, and he thought that he understood something about that feeling, though from a different angle. "Is that why you were reading the contract law book?" he asked. "I've been reading it for 2 years," she said. "Looking for anything that gave me a different position." She paused. "I hadn't considered declaratory courtship. It's extremely old. Most people don't know it's still valid." "I didn't find out magic was real until 6 weeks ago," Harry said. "I had no prior knowledge about which laws were common and which weren't. I just read everything and noted what seemed useful." Daphne looked at him again with that recalibrating expression. "You knew none of this and you worked it out in 6 weeks." "I've had a lot of practice working things out quickly," Harry said. "Slower is safer, usually. But I've also learned when slow isn't an option." A sound came from the dormitory corridors, footsteps, the thump of someone opening a trunk too enthusiastically. The common room was about to become populated. Daphne uncurled herself from the chair and stood, setting her book under her arm with a precise movement. "I don't trust easily," she said. "I want to be clear about that." "I know," Harry said. "The abeyance is not a rejection." "I know that too." She looked at him one more time. "How?" she asked, and it was the first time she'd sounded anything other than composed, not shaken, but genuinely curious, the way someone sounds when they encounter a question they haven't thought to ask before. "Because you're still talking to me," Harry said. The dormitory door opened and Tracy Davis appeared, hair still half escaping its overnight braid, robes not quite straight, with the expression of someone who had achieved mourning on willpower alone. Right, Tracy said, looking between them with eyes that were sharper than her disheveled state suggested. I've been awake for 30 seconds and I'm already watching something happen. Someone explain to me what I'm watching. Breakfast, Daphne said, and walked toward the common room door. Tracy stared at Harry. Harry picked up his defense book and stood. Tea's still hot, he said. Behind the bookshelf. Tracy looked at the bookshelf, then at Harry's retreating form, then at Daphne's retreating form, and then back at the bookshelf with the expression of someone accepting that this was going to be the year in which nothing was explained to them adequately. The Great Hall at breakfast was a different creature from the Great Hall at feast. Looser, louder, more honest, students arriving in various states of morning completion, prefects coordinating schedules, owls dropping post in controlled chaos onto toast and pumpkin juice. An owl landed in front of Harry as he sat down. It was a school owl, anonymous gray-brown, carrying a sealed letter with Hogwarts crest. He opened it. Inside was his timetable and, beneath it, a brief handwritten note in precise script, Mr. Potter. My office. This evening, 6 o'clock. Professor Dumbledore. Harry folded it and put it in his robe pocket. Dumbledore, Tracy observed from across the table. She had exceptional peripheral vision, apparently. Yes, Harry said. Fast, she said. I expected it, Harry said. Across the hall at the Gryffindor table, he could see Hermione Granger explaining something at considerable length to a girl with red hair while Neville ate toast and watched Harry with the kind of open curiosity that was too uncomplicated to be offensive. Harry caught Neville's eye and nodded once. Neville went slightly pink and nodded back. Who's the Gryffindor? Tracy asked. Neville Longbottom, Harry said. I met him on the train. Longbottom's a good family, she said, with the casual assessment of someone who had been raised in wizarding social geography. Old. Solid. His grandmother's a force of nature, from what my mum says. She looked at Harry with that sharp sideways attention. You're collecting allies. I'm making friends, Harry said. Those are often the same thing. Sometimes, Harry allowed. Not always. Draco was at the far end of the Slytherin table with Crabbe and Goyle, eating with the deliberate distance of someone establishing that they had not decided to adjust their position yet. Harry had noticed, walking in, that Draco had clocked his arrival and then looked away with the specific precision of someone choosing not to look. Blaise Zabini was 3 seats down from Harry, eating a perfectly prepared plate of fruit and looking at his schedule with the calm of someone who had already decided that all this was beneath comment, but was watching it anyway. Zabini, Harry said. Blaise looked up. His expression was, and remained throughout, entirely polite and entirely unreadable. Blaise, Harry said. A fractional pause. Harry, Blaise said, and went back to his fruit. Harry had read about the Zabini family too. His mother had been married 7 times, each husband wealthy, each death mysterious, each time the widow had emerged from grief with more property and fewer complications. Blaise had grown up in a house where power moved quietly and no one explained their hand. He'd recognized something, Harry thought. That first night in the common room, the not blinking. He'd recognized a player. Harry put it away for later and ate his eggs and watched the Morning Post arrive and thought about Dumbledore's note. Transfiguration was first, and Professor McGonagall arrived to class before any of them did, was already sitting at her desk when the first students filed in, and transformed from her animagus cat form in a single fluid movement that had the combined effect of being enormously impressive and a very effective way of establishing authority in the first 30 seconds. Harry sat at the second row. He'd considered the front, more information, more access to the demonstration, but the second row gave you a better angle on the whole room, and he'd learned early that seeing everything was more valuable than seeing the near thing in detail. Hermione Granger sat in the front row. McGonagall went through the theory with brisk precision, not pausing for questions until she was ready for them, covering the principles of transfiguration, the intent, the visualization, the structured will, and then she set them the task. A matchstick to a needle. Harry picked up his wand. He'd bought it in Ollivander's, which had been a strange and searching experience. Ollivander had tried 11 wands before the 11th, Holly, 11 inches, phoenix feather, had produced that warmth, that sense of rightness, the shower of red and gold sparks. Ollivander had looked at it for a long time with an expression Harry couldn't name, and said, "Curious. Curious." And when Harry had asked what was curious, Ollivander had said, "The phoenix whose tail feather sits in your wand gave another feather. Only one other. I think you know who made use of that wand, Mr. Potter." Harry had put that information in the same mental shelf as Dumbledore's note and the cupboard address on his letter. He'd deal with it when he had more pieces. He looked at the matchstick. He thought about what McGonagall had said: intent, visualization, structured will. He thought about the accidental magic he'd done at the Dursleys over the years, the hair growing back, the somehow ended up on the roof escape from Dudley's gang, the glass at the zoo. Unstructured. Reactive. The magic responding to a need. This was different. This was saying to the magic, "Here is what I want, here is the shape of it, here is why." He touched his wand to the matchstick. He thought, needle. Not the word but the thing. The silver length of it, the eye, the point, the specific quality of something that was designed to pass through fabric and hold thread and make things connect. The matchstick became a needle. Not a partial transformation. Not a needle-shaped thing with the ghost of wood in it. A needle. Clean, complete, reflecting the light from the windows. McGonagall looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Harry. Then she looked at the needle again. "That is," she said, "very good work, Mr. Potter." She picked it up, examined it, set it down. 10 points to Slytherin. From beside him, a girl called Millicent Bulstrode made a frustrated sound and poked her matchstick harder. It did not become a needle. At the front of the room, Hermione Granger's matchstick became something needle-adjacent on her third attempt, and McGonagall awarded her 7 points, and Hermione's expression suggested she was already planning her approach for attempt 4. Harry did the second matchstick. Then the third. By the time the class ended, he'd done 6, and the last one he'd done wandlessly, his wand resting flat on the table, just to see if he could. He could. The matchstick became a needle slightly more slowly, but it became a needle. He didn't mention this. There was no reason to mention it yet. Defense against the dark arts was after lunch, which meant that by the time the first-year Slytherins filed in, Harry had spent the morning's gap periods in the library, locating and beginning the theory of magical protection and also finding, somewhat accidentally, a slim text on the back shelf titled Magical Signatures and Detection, which discussed how trained wizards could sense magical presence and intent. He sat in the middle of the classroom and watched Professor Quirrell take the register. Quirrell was a slight man, younger than he appeared at first because the nervousness aged him. He held the register like it might bite him. He stuttered. He adjusted his turban 3 times before the register was finished. He smiled at students with the specific over-earnest quality of someone performing approachability. Harry watched all of this and thought, this is not what a nervous person looks like. This is what nervousness looks like when someone is wearing it. The distinction mattered. He'd known enough people in his life who performed emotions they didn't have, Aunt Petunia, who performed domestic contentment for the neighbors, Uncle Vernon, who performed good-natured authority at work functions, Dudley, who performed vulnerability when an adult was watching and threat when they weren't. Harry had learned early that the performance of a thing and the thing itself moved differently. The performance was always slightly off-tempo. Quirrell was performing nervousness. The rhythm was wrong. The stuttering came slightly too late after the stimulus, like a translation delay. The content of the class was straightforward enough: an introduction to defensive theory, a brief history of common dark creature categories, a demonstration of a simple warding charm that Quirrell performed competently and described haltingly. The disconnect between the performance and the competence was, to Harry, fascinating. When Quirrell's eyes passed over him during the register, Potter? They moved on too quickly. Not the lingering stare Harry had gotten used to from everyone else. A deliberate, controlled not lingering. Harry noted it. After class, in the corridor, he fell into step beside Tracy with the defense textbook under his arm. "What did you think of Quirrell?" he asked. Tracy considered. "Nervous. Bit useless." "Useless?" Harry asked. "He seemed scared of the classroom." "He performed scared of the classroom," Harry said carefully. "The warding charm he demonstrated, did you see his wand movement on it?" Tracy frowned, thinking back. "It was clean," she said slowly. "Actually really clean, for someone who was stuttering through the theory." "Yes," Harry said. "Exactly." Tracy looked at him sideways. "You're saying he's faking it?" "I'm saying I'm paying attention," Harry said. "Same thing, the way you do it." She walked in silence for a moment. "Are you going to do something about it?" "Not yet," Harry said. "I need more information." Tracy nodded, filing this. "What time is your thing with Dumbledore?" 6. "I'll be in the common room." "Tell me everything." "Some things," Harry said. "I'll accept some things," Tracy said, with the tone of someone keeping running negotiations. At 3:30, herbology ended and Harry sat on the low stone wall outside the greenhouses, letting the afternoon sun make the most of its limited autumn energy, and read the first chapter of Magical Signatures and Detection again. "You read The Way Other People Eat," said a voice. He looked up. Neville Longbottom was standing 3 feet away, holding his herbology notes and looking at Harry with the particular expression he'd been wearing all day when their paths crossed in the castle, wanting to speak but waiting for an opening. "Sit down," Harry said. "How was herbology from the Gryffindor side?" Neville sat. He set his notes on the wall between them and looked at them as though they contained the answer to something. "Professor Sprout is wonderful," he said, with a sincerity that was the most genuine thing Harry had heard all day. "Plants are, I understand plants. They make sense." He paused. "People are harder." "Usually," Harry agreed. "Everyone in Gryffindor wants to talk about last night," Neville said. He said it carefully, not accusatorially, just informatively. "What you did." "Everyone has an opinion." "What's the main opinion?" "It's split, actually." Neville plucked at a leaf that had landed on his notes. "Half of them think it was brilliant and romantic, though Hermione says the old codes are technically patriarchal in their original construction and you should have asked Daphne privately first before making a public declaration." He paused. "She has a point." "She does," Harry said. "I know." He turned a page. "If I'd done it privately, it would have been a private arrangement. The protection only has force if it's publicly witnessed. That's the whole point of the old codes, the social weight of them is carried by the public acknowledgement." He looked at Neville. "I'll explain that to Hermione if she wants to hear it." Neville blinked. "You'll talk to Hermione?" "Why wouldn't I? You're Slytherin." "She's clever and she's right that the original codes had problems," Harry said. "Those aren't Gryffindor facts. They're just facts." He looked back at his book. "What's the other half saying?" "That it was presumptuous and strange and you're going to cause trouble." Neville paused. "Ron Weasley said, he said a lot of things, actually. He's very loud about blood status and house alliances and he doesn't like Slytherin much." "I've gathered," Harry said. "He tried to tell me on the train that I'd made a mistake with the sorting. He says his mum's been telling him stories about Harry Potter since he was small and the story in those tales was a Gryffindor," Neville said, with the gently apologetic tone of someone delivering news they didn't choose to carry. "I know what story people expected," Harry said. "I'm writing a different one." He looked at Neville. "What do you think?" Neville considered this with the seriousness he brought to all direct questions, the kind of seriousness that came from someone who'd rarely been asked for their opinion and took it gravely when they were. "I think," he said slowly, "that you know what you're doing, even when it doesn't look like it." And I think Daphne Greengrass looked less scared and more settled after you sat down. Even though she pretended not to be either. Harry looked at Neville for a moment. "You're observant," he said. Neville went slightly red. "Gran says I'm too much inside my own head. She calls it daydreaming. But I notice things." "That's not a flaw," Harry said. "That's useful." He closed his book. "I meant it about Hermione, by the way. Tell her she can find me in the library tomorrow morning if she wants to argue about the theoretical framework of the old codes. I'll be there from 7. Neville stared at him. "You're going to invite Hermione Granger to an argument?" "She's going to have one anyway," Harry said. "I'd rather have it on my schedule." Neville laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him, and it was such a normal, human sound in the middle of a very political day that Harry felt something in himself relax that he hadn't quite noticed was tense. Dumbledore's office was at the top of a winding staircase behind a gargoyle that moved aside when the headmaster's voice called down, "Come up, Mr. Potter," apparently having been warned. Harry climbed the stairs at his own pace and knocked on the door. "Come in." The office was extraordinary, and Harry made himself look at it properly rather than being overwhelmed by it, because that was the point of rooms like this, to establish awe as a precondition for the conversation. He looked at the shelves of complex spinning instruments, the portraits of former headmasters, sleeping or watching or both at once, the enormous desk behind which Dumbledore sat with his hands folded and his half-moon glasses riding low on his nose. And Fawkes, on the perch. The phoenix turned one dark eye toward Harry as he came in, and the sound it made was not quite a song but was in that direction. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "Please sit." Harry sat. He set his hands on his knees and waited. "A remarkable first day," Dumbledore said. His voice was warm. The twinkle was fully operational. "I confess that in many years of sorting ceremonies, I have not witnessed that particular sequence of events." "Which part?" Harry asked. "All of it, I think, taken together." Dumbledore tilted his head slightly. "You chose Slytherin." "The hat gave me the choice," Harry said. "I chose." "Indeed. The hat rarely does that." "I know." "You've done quite a lot of reading," Dumbledore said, and there was something under the warmth, not alarm, not quite, but a recalibration of the kind that Harry was beginning to recognize in powerful people when they encountered something outside their model. 6 weeks, Harry said. "I had a lot to catch up on." "Yes." Dumbledore looked at him with the gentleness of someone deciding how to say something. "I want you to know that I am here to support you, whatever house you are in. Slytherin has an unfortunate recent history, but it is a fine house with a fine tradition, and I have no doubt that you will, Professor," Harry said. Dumbledore paused. "My Hogwarts letter was addressed to the cupboard under the stairs," Harry said. He said it simply, without heat, the way you'd note a factual discrepancy. "Not the smallest bedroom. Not the Dursley residence. The cupboard." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "That address came from the monitoring charm on underage magic usage, which tracks location as well as incident. I read about that in the standard history of magical registry law." He paused. "So someone knew." "For a long time." The office was very quiet. The spinning instruments spun. Fawkes made a soft sound. Something moved in Dumbledore's expression, not the twinkle, which remained, but something deeper, something that had more weight to it. Not guilt, Harry thought. Not quite. More like the expression of someone who had made a choice a long time ago that they believed was right and were now having that belief complicated. "There were reasons," Dumbledore said, and his voice had lost some of its performance, "that I believed it important for you to be placed with your mother's family." Reasons relating to a very old protective magic. I did not know, or chose not to know, which is perhaps the same thing, the specifics of the conditions. He looked at Harry. For that I am sorry, Harry. Genuinely. Harry held his gaze. He was looking for the lie in it and not finding one, which didn't mean there wasn't a deeper layer, but meant that this particular apology was real. Thank you, Harry said. I'll accept that. I hope, Dumbledore said, that we can build trust. Despite the complicated beginning. I'm interested in that, Harry said. I need to trust you, and I need you to trust me, because I think this year is going to involve things that require both. He kept his eyes level. But trust means telling me things. Not giving me incomplete information because you've decided I can't handle it or shouldn't know yet. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. You are very direct, he said. I grew up having to read everything from subtext, Harry said. I got tired of it. A sound came from Dumbledore that might, in a slightly different conversation, have been a laugh. It wasn't quite, but it was related. Will you tell me, he said, what gave you the idea for the declaration last night? I read the right book, Harry said. And Daphne Greengrass needed something that I was in a position to give. The codes made it legal and formal and therefore difficult to contest. He paused. I also thought it was the right thing to do. Because of the Malfoy arrangement? Because she was sitting alone on that train, Harry said. And reading a contract law book at 10 years old. And her father didn't come to the platform. He let that sit. She'd been trying to solve it herself for 2 years. I had a better tool. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Harry, he said softly, do you understand what you've set in motion? Not legally, socially, politically. The Malfoy family will not simply accept this. Good, Harry said. The twinkle in Dumbledore's eyes changed quality, became something that wasn't entirely benevolent, something that had more of an edge, something that Harry thought might be the real thing underneath the performed wisdom. Very well, Dumbledore said. Then I suggest we meet weekly, you and I, so that I may offer context and you may offer your perspective. Would that be acceptable? Yes, Harry said. As long as the context is complete. I will do my best, Dumbledore said. Harry stood, because the conversation had reached its natural point. There's one more thing, he said. Yes? Professor Quirrell, Harry said. I'd like you to tell me what you know about where he went on his sabbatical last year. The office was very quiet. The portrait of a former headmistress had stopped pretending to sleep. That, Dumbledore said, after a pause, is a longer conversation. Save it for next week, Harry said. I'll have more data by then. He nodded to Fawkes on the way out. Fawkes inclined his head, just slightly, as though they'd reached a mutual understanding. The Slytherin common room at 9 in the evening had a different atmosphere from the morning, more people, more noise, but a specific kind of noise, the layered conversations of a house that conducted a significant portion of its social life in measured words and careful positioning. Harry came in, put his bag down by the chair he'd already started to think of as his, by the largest lake window, because the view cleared his head, and found Tracy cross-legged on the rug nearby with a chart she'd apparently drawn herself of the first-year Slytherins and their family connections. Did you draw that today? Harry asked. During History of Magic, Tracy said without apology. Binns is a ghost and his voice does something to time. I needed a project. She held the chart up. This is useful. Sit down. Harry sat. Daphne appeared from the direction of the girls' dormitory and dropped onto the sofa beside Tracy's rug section, carrying a notebook that already had close, precise writing in it. How was Dumbledore? Tracy asked. Interesting, Harry said. He apologized. For what? Something that needed apologizing for. He looked at the chart. Walk me through this. Tracy's chart was, honestly, quite good. She'd laid out the first-year Slytherins in a rough map of political affiliation, noting which families had formal ties, which had social ones, which were neutral. The Malfoy orbit was clearly marked at one end. Crabbe, Goyle, Pansy Parkinson's family had been allied with the Malfoys for a generation. Harry's name was in the middle, with a question mark, and Daphne's name had a small drawn line to Harry's that Tracy had labeled formal adjacency in small, careful letters. Blaise? Harry asked, noting that Zabini's name was floating somewhere independent. Neutral, Tracy said. His family doesn't commit to anyone. They observe. Has he said anything to you about last night? He said, Tracy reported, that was well played. Those exact words. Then he ate his apple. Harry nodded slowly. Theodore not? Quiet, Daphne said, from behind her notebook. His father is a Death Eater. He's not his father, but he's cautious about making that distinction publicly. Because saying you're not your father implies your father was something worth not being, Harry said. Daphne looked up. Yes. Exactly. Across the common room, at a table near the fireplace, Draco Malfoy was studying with Crabbe and Goyle and Pansy, and doing a reasonable impression of someone engaged in schoolwork, and doing a significantly less convincing impression of someone who wasn't paying attention to Harry's corner of the room. He's going to move soon, Tracy said. I give it a week before he does something formal. Less, Harry said. 2 days. He needs to reassert position before it settles into the assumption that he doesn't have one. He leaned back in his chair. When he does, don't escalate. Don't ignore either. Acknowledge and deflect. Are you coaching us? Tracy asked. I'm thinking out loud, Harry said. The distinction is getting thinner, Tracy told him, but she wrote something in the margin of her chart. How was potions? Harry asked Daphne. You were there, she pointed out. I was watching Snape. You were actually doing the potion. Daphne's expression did something complicated. Potions had been, eventful, was one word for it. Snape's arrival in the classroom had been operatic, the theatrical entrance, the lights, the voice descending on fame like a bird of prey, the specific intensity of attention he directed at Harry the moment roll was called. Harry had sat through it with his hands flat on the desk and answered Snape's rapid-fire questions about potion ingredients with the calm precision of someone who had read the textbook 3 times. Snape had not awarded house points for the answers. He'd moved on without acknowledging them. Harry had noted this and filed it. He wanted to unsettle you, Daphne said. He expected either defensive resentment or nervous compliance. I gave him neither. He didn't know where to put that, she said. He's used to being able to categorize students in the first 5 minutes. She turned a page in her notebook. He's going to be a problem. He's also the best teacher in the school, Harry said. And he was my mother's friend, once. Before things went badly. Both Tracy and Daphne looked at him. I've read about that too, Harry said, before they could ask. Tracy set her chart down. You know what's interesting about you, she said. Most people who do something dramatic, make a big declaration, march into the headmaster's office, stare down a teacher, they're doing it from adrenaline. They're running hot. You run cold. Is that bad? Harry asked. No, Tracy said seriously. It's actually very Slytherin, in the best way. The good Slytherins, the historical ones, the clever ones, they never moved without knowing why. The bad ones moved from ego. She tilted her head. You don't seem egotistical. I had 10 years of things designed to convince me I was nothing, Harry said, matter-of-factly. I came out the other side being very clear on what I actually am. Those are different from ego. The common room fire crackled. Something moved outside the lake window, large and dark. The green lamps gave everything the quality of being underwater. Daphne closed her notebook. "What are you?" she said. The question was direct. Genuinely asked. Not a challenge. Harry thought about it. Not performing consideration, but actually thinking. What was he? He was someone who had spent 10 years invisible and learned to see everything. He was someone who had found out at 11 that he was something the entire world had been talking about, had made choices in the first 12 hours that had surprised a 900-year-old hat. He was someone who had read a courtship law book and acted on it because a girl on a train had been reading the same book and hadn't found the answer she needed yet. "I don't know yet," he said, and meant it. "But I think this year is going to help me figure it out." Daphne looked at him. The firelight moved on her face. She nodded once, a small definite nod, and opened her notebook again. And in the corner of the common room, Draco Malfoy looked at Harry with the expression of someone who had been planning their next move and had just realized they weren't sure it would work. 2 days later, Draco did move. Not directly, he wasn't that inelegant. He moved through Pansy Parkinson, who approached Daphne during breakfast with the social pressure of someone delivering a message wrapped in pleasantries, suggesting that Daphne join the study group Draco was organizing that evening, suggesting further that Daphne's current social positioning was creating complications for her family's relationships, suggesting, with the careful deniability of someone who'd been taught this maneuver, that perhaps the public declaration was something that could be quietly set aside. Daphne listened to all of it with perfect composure. Then she said, "Tell Draco that the declaration is formal, filed under Old Code Witness law, and any approach designed to set it aside constitutes a violation of House Potter's protection rights, which has formal consequences." She smiled pleasantly. "And tell him the tea in the dungeon kitchen is lovely this time of year." Pansy stared at her. Harry, who had been eating breakfast 5 seats down and not visibly listening, allowed himself a brief moment of quiet satisfaction, which he expressed by refilling his pumpkin juice. Tracy, who had been watching the whole exchange, caught his eye across the table and mouthed, "Cold." Harry lifted his goblet. The first flying lesson happened on a Thursday afternoon, and Harry discovered that the thing he was naturally good at, instinctively, in the bone, without instruction or study, was flying. He'd known there might be something. The accidental magic had always been triggered by physical need, the escape from Dudley's gang, the roof. His body knew things about motion and gravity that he hadn't learned anywhere. But this was different. When the broom rose to his hand and he wrapped his fingers around it and kicked off the ground, the world inverted itself in the most useful way, became simple. There was the air, there was the broom beneath him, and every other complexity fell away. He didn't show off. He flew cleanly, controlled, precise. He followed Madame Hooch's instructions to the letter and then, during the free circle period, he flew to the height of the turrets and looked out over the grounds, at the lake and the forest and the mountains, at the castle below him, and breathed. He didn't notice how long he was up there until Hooch called them all back down. She looked at him with a measuring expression when he landed. "How long have you been flying?" she asked. "Today's my first time," Harry said. She looked at him for another moment. "Right," she said. Then she wrote something in her notebook and moved on, which Harry suspected was going to become a note to Professor McGonagall before evening. Neville, who had managed 3 successful circuits and been terrified for all of them, found Harry afterward. "You flew," he said. "So did you," Harry pointed out. "I controlled the panic," Neville said. "You were doing something completely different." He shook his head. Would it be alright if I studied with you sometimes? Not Slytherin stuff, just, you explain things in a way that makes sense." "Tomorrow morning," Harry said. "Library, 7:30. Bring your transfiguration notes." Neville beamed. It was such a pure expression that Harry felt something tighten in his chest in a way he'd learned, in the last few days, meant something he was still working out the name for. He thought it might be the feeling of having something that was properly his. That night, Harry came back to the common room late, after an hour in the library with magical signatures and detection and a half-hour sitting by the lake outside, not inside looking through the window, but actually outside, sitting on a stone at the water's edge, watching the squid's tentacles break the surface in the near dark. The common room was quiet when he came in. Most first-years were in bed. Daphne was in his chair. She was not reading. She was looking at the lake window, at the black water outside, at the reflection of the green lamps. She looked up when he came in and didn't move out of the chair. Harry got another chair and sat beside her and looked at the window too. "My father wrote," she said, after a while. "About the declaration? About how disappointed he is that I allowed myself to be maneuvered into a situation that disrupts our family's arrangements." She said the words precisely, as though she was quoting. "He says we need to discuss this at Christmas. Will you go home at Christmas?" A pause. "I haven't decided." Harry turned this over. "You can stay at Hogwarts," he said. "I intend to." She looked at him. "You're not going to the Dursleys?" "There's nothing for me there," Harry said simply. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that was quieter than everything else she'd said since the train. "I don't know what I want it to mean," she said. "The declaration. I understand what it is legally. I understand what you did and why. I just don't." She stopped. "You don't have to figure it out yet," Harry said. "It's been 3 days. I'm used to having a plan." "So am I," Harry said. "But plans are for things you can control. People are different." He looked at the water. "I didn't declare because I had a plan for what happened next. I declared because it was right." He paused. "The rest we work out as we go." She looked at him for a long time. In the greenish light of the common room, with the lake outside moving in its dark patterns, she looked very young and very composed and very tired of pretending those two things weren't simultaneously true. "You're strange, Potter," she said. "You said that on the train," he noted. "It keeps being true." "I'll take it," Harry said. And they sat there together in the quiet of the dungeon, watching the water move outside the green glass, until Tracy appeared at the dormitory door in her dressing gown, saw them, and went back inside without a word, but not before giving Harry a look that communicated, with enormous efficiency, that she approved of whatever this was even though she still didn't fully understand it. Harry thought that was probably enough for now. Chapter 3, The Old Laws. The library at 7 in the morning was Harry's favorite version of Hogwarts. Empty tables, dust moving in the early light, Madame Pants somewhere in the stacks doing whatever librarians did before the students arrived to complicate things. The smell of old paper and something faintly mineral, like the stone of the castle itself, had been ground up and pressed between pages. It was the closest thing Harry had found to the feeling he used to get in the primary school library, that particular quality of a space that contained more than it showed. He had 3 books open and was working through a cross-reference between the Old Laws of Magical Britain, Wizarding Social Structures, Historical Survey, and the relevant sections of Foundations of Wizarding Contract Law when Hermione Granger arrived at 6 minutes past 7, already dressed and carrying more books than seemed physically advisable. She sat down across from him without preamble, put her books down, looked at his arrangement of texts, and said, "You've already found the Ravensworth Amendment." Harry looked up. "Page 47 of the survey," he said. "Which actually contradicts Oliphant's reading of the original Declaration statute, because Ravensworth was writing about post-ministry codification, not the pre-ministry originals." Hermione's expression moved through the specific sequence that Harry had noticed it performed when she encountered someone operating at a level she hadn't anticipated: dismissal, reconsideration, rapid adjustment, something approaching enthusiasm. She sat forward. "But the pre-ministry originals have never been formally repealed." "No. They've been superseded in some areas and supplemented in others, but the Declaration Protocol specifically was never touched because it so rarely comes up." Harry turned the survey to face her so she could see the relevant passage. The ministry doesn't like acknowledging it exists because it creates obligations they can't regulate, but it's fully valid. Goblin law actually reinforces it. The Gringotts Charter recognizes declaratory bonds as binding on estate obligations. Hermione read the passage. Her lips moved slightly. Then she looked up. "That's actually quite brilliant," she said, with the specific reluctance of someone paying a compliment they'd rather not but are too honest to withhold. "Thank you," Harry said. "It doesn't fully address my concern," she said, sitting back and folding her hands in the way that indicated she had prepared remarks. The structure of the original codes was created in a period when women had no independent legal standing. The Declaration's protection clause exists precisely because women needed protecting, because they had no other legal mechanism. Using a law that was designed as a substitute for rights that should have existed independently it's instrumentally useful but structurally problematic. Harry looked at her. "You're right," he said. Hermione blinked. She'd clearly prepared for resistance. "Oh," she said. "The framework is flawed. It's the best available tool within a flawed system, but using it doesn't fix the system, it just patches around it." He paused. "Daphne knows this. We've talked about it. She's in abeyance partly because she wants to be sure she's choosing it and not just accepting a different kind of arrangement." Hermione was quiet for a moment, reassembling her approach. "What does abeyance mean, practically?" "The protection stands. The courtship is neither confirmed nor denied. She has full authority to end either at any point." Harry looked at his books. "It was her choice from the moment after I sat down. I gave her a tool. What she does with it is hers." Hermione looked at the table between them. She was thinking, Harry could see it, the way she turned a problem over, looking for the angle where it became clean. "What do you actually want?" she asked. "From all of this?" "Not the legal architecture, not the protection. What do you want?" It was the second time in a week someone had asked Harry a version of that question. He was beginning to appreciate that the people worth talking to were the ones who asked it. "I want to understand this world I've been dropped into," he said honestly. "I want to be in a position where I can make decisions rather than have decisions made for me. I want," he paused, because the next part was harder to articulate. "I want the people I'm responsible for to be all right." Daphne was in a situation that had a solution she didn't know about yet. "I knew about it. The logical thing was to use it." "You consider yourself responsible for her," Hermione said. "Not critically. Just observing." "I made a public declaration," Harry said. "That comes with responsibilities. I knew that when I made it." Hermione picked up the old Laws of Magical Britain and turned it over in her hands. "Can I borrow this? I haven't finished with it yet." "But there's another copy, second shelf from the top, far left stack. It's the older edition, better footnotes." She went and got it. When she came back she sat down again, and they read in companionable silence for a while, and it was, Harry thought, almost exactly like the feeling of the early morning common room, the comfortable silence of two people who were both genuinely interested in the same thing and didn't need to perform it at each other. Neville arrived at 7:30 with his transfiguration notes and only slightly started at finding Hermione already there. "Oh, good," Hermione said. "I've been wanting to go over the matchstick exercise." "Neville, how are you visualizing the transformation?" "Because I think the issue is, Hermione," Harry said. "What?" "Let him answer first." She stopped. She looked at Neville. "Sorry," she said, and meant it. "How are you visualizing it?" Neville, who had been bracing for a lecture, visibly recalibrated. He said. "Like, I'm trying to see both things at once. The matchstick and the needle?" "That's the problem," Harry said. "You can't hold both. You have to hold only the destination. The starting point will take care of itself." He pulled a matchstick from his robe pocket, he'd taken to carrying them, and set it on the table. Try it. Don't think about the matchstick at all. Think about a needle. What it looks like. What it's for. What it feels like to hold one. Neville frowned at the matchstick. His wand moved, and the matchstick shivered, and then the tip of it became a needle point while the rest remained wood. Better, Harry said immediately. That's real progress, Neville. The tip converted because you got the destination clear, the rest is just practice. He meant it. The progress from the classroom 2 days ago was genuine. Neville looked at the half-needle with an expression of suppressed delight. Actually, Harry said. Hermione was watching this exchange with the expression she got when she was categorizing something new and finding it didn't fit neatly. Harry noticed it and ignored it, which was itself, he suspected, information for her. On Friday morning a notice appeared on the Slytherin common room board, written in the particular green ink that denoted official house communication. First-year Quidditch candidates are invited to try out for the seeker position. Saturday, 9 a.m., the pitch. By order of the Slytherin Quidditch captain. Harry read it, noted it, and thought nothing further about it until Marcus Flint, 5th year, Quidditch captain, with the build of someone who had once been hit by a bludger and found it agreeable, found him in the corridor between charms and lunch and blocked his path with the body language of someone who didn't usually have to negotiate. Potter, Flint said. Heard you can fly. I flew in my first lesson on Thursday, Harry said. Hooch told McGonagall told me. Flint looked at him with the evaluating squint of someone conducting an audition. She said you looked like you'd been flying for years. I hadn't. So you're naturally good. Apparently. Flint shifted his weight. There was a calculation happening behind his eyes. Harry had done something socially disruptive on his first night, which had complicated Flint's ability to categorize him in the house hierarchy, but Flint's immediate priority was the Quidditch Cup and that was a simpler equation. Saturday, Flint said. 9 o'clock. Bring your own broom if you have one. I don't have one yet, Harry said. Use a school broom for the trial. If you make the team, we sort the broom. Flint's expression did something that might, in better lighting, have been respect. The seeker position has been empty for 2 years. We had one, Warrington, graduated. If you're half as good as Hooch's report suggests, we need you. I'll think about it, Harry said. Flint blinked. That wasn't a response his model had included. It's the seeker position. For Slytherin. You'd be the youngest, I know, Harry said. I'll think about it and tell you by tonight. Flint stared at him for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating expectations in real time, then nodded and moved on with the demeanor of someone who had conducted that interaction differently in their head. Harry continued to charms. He thought about it during Flitwick's lesson, half the mind on the Wingardium Leviosa theory, half on the strategic question of Quidditch. The feather rose from the desk on his second attempt, hovered perfectly, descended on command. Flitwick gave him a look of quiet delight and moved on. The Quidditch question was not about whether he could play. He already knew he could fly. The question was what being on the team gave him and what it cost him. It gave him legitimate standing in the house. Slytherin cared about Quidditch in a way that was almost devotional, and being the youngest seeker in a century would override a significant amount of the social complication his declaration had created. It cost him time, it put him in a position of dependence on Flint's judgment, and it made him a target for opposition teams. He weighed it. The benefits were larger. He told Flint by dinner. Saturday morning was grey and cold, the kind of October cold that arrived early to establish dominance, and Harry stood on the Quidditch pitch at 9:05 and watched Flint's assessment of him unfold with increasing speed. The school broom was terrible. It vibrated at height, listed slightly left, and had a sticky patch on the handle that Harry couldn't identify and preferred not to speculate about. He flew it like it was a thoroughbred, compensating for its every deficiency instinctively. Flint released the snitch. It was small and gold and moved with the specific erratic intelligence of something enchanted to evade, and Harry watched it go and breathed and then flew. He caught it in 45 seconds. The snitch was still struggling in his closed fist when he landed, and Flint was looking at him with the expression of someone who has just solved a problem that has been bothering them for 2 years. "Right," Flint said. "You're on the team." "I want to pick my own broom," Harry said. Flint blinked. "We usually, I know. But I fly better when I know the equipment. I'll pay for it." He had the vault at Gringotts. He didn't know its full extent yet, that was the visit he was planning, but he knew there was enough for a broom. Nimbus 2000. Flint thought for about 4 seconds. "Fine," he said. "But you're at every practice." "Every practice," Harry agreed. He walked off the pitch and found Daphne and Tracy sitting on the lowest bench of the stands, wrapped in house scarves, watching him with the particular blended expression of two people who have just watched something impressive and are deciding how much to say about it. 45 seconds, Tracy said. "The snitch was fast," Harry said modestly. "The snitch is always fast. That's the point of the snitch." Tracy looked at Daphne. "He's going to be impossible." "He already was," Daphne said, but she was watching Harry with the look she got sometimes, the evaluating one, the one that wasn't quite as composed as her default. The Malfoy family has had a tradition of funding Slytherin Quidditch equipment. Draco is going to make a move to try to buy his way into the team. "He'll play Seeker?" Harry asked. "He'll try. His father will offer to buy the entire team new brooms if they take Draco as Seeker instead." Harry considered this. "When does that happen?" "First match is in 3 weeks. He'll move before then." She paused. "In my estimation." "Your estimations have been accurate so far," Harry said. She looked at him sideways, and there was something brief in her expression that wasn't quite a smile but was in the same vicinity, there and gone so fast it might have been a trick of the grey morning light. 2 things happened in the second week of October that changed the temperature of the year. The first was the greenhouse. Second year herbology was taking place in Greenhouse 3, which was adjacent to Greenhouse 2 where the first years were working on their Devil's Snare introduction. Harry had finished the Devil's Snare exercise early, the plant responded to calm and warmth, and Harry had simply been calm and warm at it and it had released immediately, to Professor Sprout's faint bewilderment, and was moving a pot of mandrake seedlings to the higher shelf when he heard the sound. Not a voice. A pressure. A presence in his mind like a hand laid gently on a shoulder. "Something hurt here," it said, without words. Harry put the mandrake pot down and looked around. Sprout was at the far end of the greenhouse. The other students were occupied. Outside, through the glass, he could see the path to the forest and a section of old stone wall where a garden snake, maybe 18 inches long, copper-brown, was tangled in the decorative iron trellis fixed to the wall. He went outside. He crouched by the trellis and looked at the snake, which was quite thoroughly caught, its scales hooked on one of the iron points, pulling against it in a way that was making things worse. He looked at the snake. The pressure in his mind shifted, becoming something more specific, almost like words. Not words. But the shape of words. "Hold still," Harry said, and it came out both in English and in something else, something that was the same thing expressed in a different key, and the snake went still. Harry worked its scales free from the iron point with careful fingers, and the snake coiled and looked at him with the bright dark attention of something that was deciding what he was. Then it moved up his arm to his shoulder, which Harry accepted calmly, and the shape of words came again, something that resolved into a feeling like warm and safe and thank you, and Harry said, "You're welcome. Don't get caught in that again." And the snake regarded him for a moment and then slid off his shoulder and into the grass and was gone. Harry stood up and found Neville standing 2 feet behind him with a mandrake seedling in each hand and an expression of total astonishment. "Harry," Neville said. "Neville. Were you speaking to that snake?" "Yes," Harry said. It understood you. Apparently. Harry dusted off his hands. Parseltongue. I've read about it. He'd read about it in the same week he'd read about the old codes, in a slim historical text on rare magical abilities. It was uncommon, associated with Salazar Slytherin, and had a complicated social reputation that was essentially a proxy for the fact that it scared people. Harry had noted it then with interest and moved on to the next chapter. Neville was doing the visible work of integrating this information with his existing model of Harry, which appeared to be quite a large model already and was regularly requiring expansion. Does Daphne know? Not yet. Are you going to tell her? Yes, Harry said. Tonight, probably. Before someone else does. They went back inside. Sprout didn't appear to have noticed the interruption. Harry resumed his mandrake work and thought about the fact that he had not been startled by speaking to the snake, had not been frightened of it or by the experience. He'd simply done it, the way he did most things, with the focused calm of someone who had accepted that unusual things happened around him and had decided to be interested rather than alarmed. He was, he thought, quite thoroughly his father's son in some ways and his mother's in others, and in some ways not explicable by either, and he was beginning to think that was fine. The second thing was the letter. It came on a Tuesday, not with the morning post but in the afternoon, delivered by a ministry owl that arrived in the middle of charms with the precise officious timing of something sent by bureaucracy. The scroll was sealed with ministry red and addressed to Mr. H. J. Potter, Slytherin House, Hogwarts School. Flitwick raised an eyebrow and told Harry he could read it after class. Harry read it after class, in the corridor, with Tracy over his shoulder because she had no shame about it and he'd stopped minding. It was from the Office of Magical Inheritance. It informed Mr. H. J. Potter that the Potter family estate, including all vaults, properties, and associated holdings, had reached the age threshold for a formal inheritance review. It invited, which was legal language for required, Mr. Potter to present himself at Gringotts for an estate reading at his earliest convenience. At the bottom of the letter, in different handwriting than the official body, someone had added, "The contents of this reading may be time-sensitive. We recommend prompt attendance." A.D. Harry looked at the initials for a moment. Albus Dumbledore. Who had apparently been managing certain aspects of the Potter estate as trustee and who was now, apparently, suggesting Harry find out exactly what that had involved. Gringotts, Tracy read. Estate reading. She looked at Harry with bright eyes. Potter, how rich are you? I have no idea, Harry said honestly. This is the most interesting year of school in Slytherin history, Tracy said, and we're only 3 weeks in. Harry put the letter in his pocket. He'd write to Gringotts that evening and arrange a Saturday visit. He told Daphne about the Parseltongue that night. Not in the common room with potential listeners, but in the window alcove at the end of the third-floor corridor, which they'd found by accident on the second week, an alcove deep enough to hold 2 people and a reasonable conversation, with a window looking out over the grounds, and which had the useful property of not being on any of the known prefect patrol routes. He told her straightforwardly what had happened. What Parseltongue was. That Neville had seen it. Daphne sat with her back against the stone and her knees drawn up and listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was how she listened when something mattered. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. People are going to say Voldemort was a Parselmouth, she said. I know. They'll use it too, I know, Daphne. She looked at him steadily. How are you going to handle it? Not hide it, Harry said. If I hide it and someone finds out, it becomes a secret and secrets have weight. If I'm straightforward about it, it's just a fact. He paused. I'll tell Dumbledore at our next meeting. I'll mention it to Snape, probably, better he hears it from me. And if anyone brings it up socially, I'll treat it like an interesting historical fact and not a scandal. Daphne was quiet again, longer this time. My grandmother was Slytherin, she said. Not the house, the line. Distant connection. She could hear snakes but not speak to them. She looked out the window. My father thinks it's a mark of status. The old families with Slytherin blood consider it a distinction. She paused. He's going to have complicated feelings about you if he finds out. I think your father is going to have complicated feelings about me regardless, Harry said. Yes, she agreed. But this adds a layer. They sat in the comfortable quiet of the alcove, the grounds dark below them, the lights of Hagrid's hut visible far down the slope. Can I ask you something? Harry said. You can ask. The book. The contract law book. On the train. You'd been reading it for 2 years, you said. He looked at her. Did you know what you were looking for, or were you just looking? Daphne was quiet for a long moment. I knew I was looking for a way out of something, she said. I didn't know the specific form. She paused. The declaratory courtship never occurred to me because it requires someone else. I was trying to find a unilateral solution. She turned to look at him. That's something I'm still not entirely comfortable with. That the solution required you. I know, Harry said. I don't want to need anyone, she said, and it was so honest, so stripped of the composed surface, that Harry thought this was probably a sentence she'd never said to another person before. That's not the same as not wanting anyone, Harry said carefully. She looked at him for a long time. In the window light, her expression was complicated and real and entirely her own. No, she said. It's not. They went back to the common room separately, 2 minutes apart, because they weren't idiots, and the common room had eyes. But something had changed in the alcove, not dramatically, not in any way that could be named, but changed the way stones change when enough water has passed over them, slowly, completely, in the direction of a shape that was becoming itself. The troll came on Halloween. Harry had been looking forward to Halloween in the abstract way he'd always looked forward to it. The Dursleys had never celebrated it, had turned off all the lights and pretended to be out, and so to Harry it had always been a holiday glimpse through other people's windows. The great hall decorations were extraordinary, the candles replaced with floating jack-o'-lanterns, the ceiling doing something with clouds and moonlight that was purely theatrical and entirely effective. He was eating and half listening to Tracy's account of the Ravenclaw students' collective nervous breakdown over their first essay assignment when Professor Quirrell burst through the great hall doors. Not the stumbling, flustered entrance of Quirrell's performance. Something harder than that, something with real energy in it, and for a half-second, before the performance reasserted itself, Harry saw the actual man under the stutter, the one who moved with competence. The half-second was enough. Troll, Quirrell gasped. In the dungeons. Thought you ought to know. And then he fainted. The hall erupted. Dumbledore's voice cut through the noise and reorganized it into directed movement, prefects leading students to dormitories. Harry was already on his feet, not moving toward the dungeon common room with the Slytherin prefects, but toward the door that led to the girls' bathrooms on the second floor, because he had seen, 40 seconds ago when the first whisper of something's happening had moved through the hall, that Hermione Granger was not at the Gryffindor table. He'd noted her absence with the automatic inventory he kept, and the specific absence had not been a cause for alarm then, but it was now. Harry. Daphne was beside him. She'd read the direction of his movement and was already calculating. Hermione, he said. She's not at the table. She was upset earlier. Neville mentioned she'd been crying in the bathrooms after charms, something Weasley said. Daphne processed this in half a second. Second floor girls' bathroom. Between the dungeon and the great hall if the troll came through the main passage. She was already moving with him. Tracy. Tracy, right behind them, already had her wand out. Yes, I heard, I'm coming, what are we doing about a troll? We find Hermione first, Harry said. Then we deal with the troll if it's between us and her. They went against the flow of students moving to the dormitories. A fifth-year Slytherin prefect grabbed Harry's arm and said common room now in the voice of someone who expected compliance, and Harry said, there's a first-year Gryffindor in the second-floor bathrooms who doesn't know about the troll. We're going to get her, and his voice had a quality in it that the prefect's hand apparently found persuasive, because it let go. The corridors emptied fast. The three of them moved quickly through the cleared passageways, Harry in front, Daphne at his left shoulder, Tracy right. They smelled the troll before they heard it, a smell like wet stone and something fouler underneath, and then the sound of very large feet on the floor ahead, and they stopped at the corner because around that corner was a mountain troll, 12 feet of grey muscle and small vicious eyes, carrying a wooden club the size of a young tree. It was in the corridor outside the second-floor girls' bathroom. The bathroom door was closed. Lockable? Harry asked quietly. From inside, yes, Daphne murmured. The question is whether she already has. As if in answer, from behind the closed door came the sound of a very muffled, very controlled sob, and then nothing. The troll turned its head toward the door with the attention of something that could hear small frightened things and was not indifferent to them. Harry assessed the situation with the speed of someone who had spent 10 years conducting fast assessment. The troll was between them and the door. It hadn't noticed them yet. 3 wands, 1 first year each, against a 12-foot mountain troll, was not a favorable equation in standard terms. He thought about the chapter on trolls in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, which he had read in the first week because it was on the supplementary list and also because it was interesting. Mountain trolls had poor upward vision, a specific nerve cluster behind the left ear that was sensitive to targeted stinging hex, and they could be stunned if you could get sufficient combined magical force to the central nervous system, but a single first-year wand wouldn't do it. Distract it, Harry said to Tracy. Draw it away from the door. Don't let it get close to you. Daphne, when it turns, get the door open and get Hermione out. He looked at them both. I'll handle the troll. You'll handle the troll, Tracy repeated. I have an idea. Tracy looked at him for 1 second, then said, all right, in the voice of someone making a quality decision under time pressure. She stepped out into the corridor and hit the troll on the back of its left leg with the hardest stinging hex a first year had probably ever produced, which meant it stung considerably, because Tracy had been practicing her stinging hex since the second day of term because she believed in having practical skills. The troll roared and spun. Tracy was already moving backward down the corridor, drawing it after her, shouting at it with the remarkable confidence of someone who had decided that if this was happening it was going to happen at full commitment. Daphne moved. The bathroom door opened. Harry heard Hermione's surprised cry and Daphne's rapid, precise, we're getting you out, come now, voice, and he focused on the troll. It had stopped following Tracy and was turning back, confused by multiple stimuli. Its club swung up. Harry had approximately 4 seconds before it would be too close to the doorway. He raised his wand and pointed it at the troll's ear, the left one, specifically, the cluster Fantastic Beasts had mentioned, and said stupefy with the complete, focused intent he'd put into his first transfiguration. Not attempting to stun the whole troll. Targeting the specific point. The spell hit. The troll's head jerked sideways. It didn't go down, it was too large for one stunner to do that, but it stumbled, lost coordination, the club swinging wide and hitting the corridor wall instead of the door that Daphne and Hermione were now clear of. Harry followed the first spell with a second, same target, and the troll sat down heavily against the far wall with the confused expression of something that had been very recently in charge of events and was no longer sure how this had happened. It wasn't unconscious. But it was dazed enough, and Harry pointed his wand at its ear again and said, clearly, stupefy, a third time, and this time the troll's eyes went unfocused and it slid sideways against the wall and stayed there. The corridor was quiet except for their breathing and the distant sound of the castle settling into its old stones. Harry lowered his wand. Tracy came back around the corner looking between him and the troll with wide eyes. Hermione was standing in the bathroom doorway, tear-tracked face, robes slightly disheveled, gripping her wand in both hands with the controlled desperation of someone who had been about to do something brave and had been denied the opportunity. "I was going to use Wingardium Leviosa," Hermione said. "On the club. I'd worked it out." "That would have worked too," Harry said. "You used a targeted stun." She was looking at him with the intensity she brought to all new information. "You aimed for the ear cluster." "From Fantastic Beasts," Harry said. "I've read Fantastic Beasts. I didn't think of that." She sounded genuinely bothered by this, in the way that she was bothered by information gaps. "You were inside a bathroom with a troll at the door," Daphne said dryly. "Your thinking conditions were suboptimal." Hermione looked at Daphne with the particular caution of a Gryffindor confronting an unexpected Slytherin kindness. Then she looked back at Harry. "Thank you," she said. "All three of you. Don't cry in bathrooms on Halloween," Harry said, not unkindly. "Or at least tell someone where you are first." "Someone said something rude and I needed," she stopped. "It doesn't matter." "Weasley," Tracy said. Hermione's expression confirmed it without words. "Right." Harry considered this. "I'll have a conversation with him." "You don't have to do that," Hermione said quickly. "I know," Harry said. "I want to." The sound of teachers came from the floor below, McGonagall's voice carrying up clearly, and they all looked at each other and then at the unconscious troll, and Tracy said, "We should probably be visible and explanatory when they arrive," and they stood in a loose group in the corridor and waited. McGonagall came around the corner first, Snape directly behind her. She took in the scene, 3 first-year Slytherins, 1 first-year Gryffindor, 1 unconscious mountain troll, with the expression of someone who had thought they knew what this year would contain and was revising that estimate. "Would someone like to explain," she said, in a voice of controlled shock, "what has happened here?" Harry explained. Concisely, accurately, in the order events had occurred. McGonagall's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Snape was looking at Harry with the dark, measuring attention he'd had since that first potions class, not hostile, exactly, not with the contempt Harry had initially read in it, but with something more complicated, something that was still deciding what it was. "Mr. Potter," McGonagall said carefully. "You stunned a mountain troll." 3 times, Tracy offered. 3 times, McGonagall repeated. "At age 11. Targeted to the nerve cluster behind the left ear," Harry said. "It reduces the required spell power significantly." McGonagall looked at Snape. Snape looked at Harry. 20 points to Slytherin, McGonagall said. "Each." She paused. "And Miss Granger, 10 points to Gryffindor for the presence of mind to lock the door." She looked between all 4 of them. "The rest of this conversation will happen in my office tomorrow morning. For now, dormitories." "Miss Granger," Snape said, as they were turning to go. His voice was quiet, not unkind. "You will go with the Slytherin students to the dungeon level and then be escorted by Prefect to Gryffindor Tower. It is not safe to cross the castle alone tonight." Hermione looked briefly astonished by the instruction and then composed herself and nodded. They walked together through the quiet castle, the 4 of them, Slytherin and Gryffindor, and Tracy muttered a running commentary about the smell the troll had left and the structural integrity of the corridor wall, and Hermione gradually stopped gripping her wand quite so hard, and Harry walked and thought about Quirrell's entrance to the Great Hall, the half-second under the performance, the real energy underneath. The troll had been let in. He was sure of it. And he was beginning to build a picture of why. Saturday came grey and purposeful, and Harry took the flu from Hogwarts to Diagon Alley. McGonagall had arranged permission with a brevity that suggested she wasn't going to argue about it, and walked to Gringotts in the October morning with his hands in his pockets. The goblin who conducted the estate reading was named Sharpclaw, which Harry felt was probably a name chosen for professional purposes, and who had the particular demeanor of someone who had seen every kind of human arrival and was consistently unimpressed. Vault 713 was accessed on July 31 this year, Sharpclaw said, running a clawed finger down the ledger. By Professor Dumbledore, using his trustee authority. What was removed? Sharpclaw looked at him with the bright black eyes of something that respected directness. A small package, he said. Described in the trust ledger as a protected object, category, minor magical artifact, held in trust for protective purposes. What was the object? We are not told the nature of objects held in trust, Sharpclaw said. Only their deposit, custody, and removal. He turned a page. The Potter estate includes 3 properties: Potter Manor in Godric's Hollow, sealed since 1981. A property in Tinworth, Cornwall, held in secondary trust. And a townhouse in London, Grim Street, currently under Fidelius. He looked up. The Fidelius charm was cast by the late Sirius Black as secondary secret keeper. The primary keeper was Dumbledore, Harry said. Sharpclaw nodded once, carefully. The charm has degraded since 1981. The house is technically accessible but under significant disrepair. Harry looked at the table. What else? There are 2 trust accounts that were activated by a ministry order in 1981, managed by Dumbledore until your majority. Monthly withdrawals have been made from the secondary account, an allowance paid to one Petunia Desley née Evans, for the purpose of, and I quote the trust instruction, the care and housing of one Harry James Potter. Sharpclaw said this with the flat tone of someone reading facts that have emotional content but are not his to editorialize. Harry sat with this for a moment. How much, he said. Sharpclaw told him. Harry was quiet. Petunia Desley had been receiving money from Harry's own inheritance. Not ministry charity, not Dumbledore's generosity. Harry's family money, paying for the privilege of sleeping in a cupboard. I'd like to stop that payment, Harry said. You have the authority to do so, as of today. Sharpclaw produced a document. Sign here. Harry signed. His signature looked different somehow, more definite, the letters having a quality they hadn't when he'd signed his school supply receipts in flourish and blots. He walked out of Gringotts into the October cold of Diagon Alley, and he stood on the steps and looked at the street and let the information settle into him without performance. The Desleys had been paid. Paid from his parents' money. And the person who had managed the trust, who had made those payments every month, who had known the address on the letter was a cupboard, had done all of it under the heading of protection, of sacrifice, of the greater good. He wasn't angry. That surprised him slightly. He thought he should be angry and he wasn't, or rather the anger was there but it was cold, contained, filed in the same mental shelf as everything else that required acting on eventually. He had the information now. He was in control of the payment now. He knew the shape of the thing. He walked to Nimbus Racing Brooms, bought himself a Nimbus 2000, the sales wizard recognized him immediately and he let the man have his moment and then paid with his Gringotts token and took the broom without ceremony, and walked back through Diagon Alley toward the Leaky Cauldron. He passed a bookshop. In the window, angled toward the street, was a book he hadn't seen before, The Potter Family, a noble line, published by a minor wizarding press, the kind of quickie publication that materialized around any new development in a famous case. He looked at his own name on the cover, stamped under a reproduced coat of arms. Then he went inside and bought that book too. He was back at Hogwarts by 4 o'clock. The Saturday afternoon castle had the particular quiet of a building in which 500 people were in their rooms or the grounds or the library, all conducting their private lives independently. Harry came back to the Slytherin common room and found Daphne in his chair again, which had become, without discussion, a shared arrangement rather than a territorial one. He sat in the adjacent chair and put the Gringotts information and the Potter family book on the table between them. Daphne looked at the book. Looked at him. Read his expression with the precision she brought to important information. How bad, she said. Not catastrophic, Harry said. But clarifying. He explained the payment to Petunia. He watched Daphne's composure hold, and underneath it, just briefly, in the set of her jaw, something that was on Hermione's end of the emotional spectrum, something that thought this was not acceptable. "Stopped?" she asked. "As of this morning." She nodded. "Good. The property in Godric's Hollow is sealed but mine," Harry said. "The London one is under a degraded Fidelius. There's a vault, the main vault, not the one I've been using, that I haven't opened yet. Sharpclaw says it requires me in person as heir, not as dependent. I have to come back after my 12th birthday." "Your main vault," Daphne said. "You've been using a secondary account. The trust account." "Apparently." Harry looked at the fire. "The main Potter vault has been sealed since 1981. Daphne absorbed this. That's going to contain things that change your position considerably." "Probably." He picked up the small Potter family book. "My family was one of the oldest in Britain. Before the last war they were significant politically. My grandfather was on the Waisengamot. My great-grandfather helped draft the international statute supplementary clauses." He turned the book over. "I've been operating as a ward. I'm not a ward. I'm the last of a major house." Daphne looked at him with the specific focus she reserved for things that were important. "That changes everything," she said quietly. "Socially. Politically. Legally." "Yes," Harry said. "The Malfoys are going to, I know. Dumbledore is going to want to manage how this information, I know that too." She looked at him. "What are you going to do?" Harry put the book down and looked at the fire, and thought about the vault in Gringotts that had been sealed for 10 years, about the property in Godric's Hollow that smelled of old smoke and grief and things that weren't finished yet, about the Sorting Hat saying the patience of someone who is waiting for the right moment, and about the fact that he was 11 and this was the beginning, not the end, and everything he was learning was a piece of something larger that he couldn't yet see the full shape of. "I'm going to learn everything I can," Harry said. "This year. As much as possible. Before anyone decides what I'm supposed to do about any of it." Daphne was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and tapped the Potter family book. "Chapter 6, she said. "The alliances the Potters maintained. There's a historical connection with the Greengrass line." She paused. "Pre-war. Our families worked together." Harry looked at her. Something was moving in her expression, not warmth, exactly, or not only warmth, but something more structural than that, something like a decision that had been made at a foundational level and was now surfacing. "I hadn't made the connection until I read it this summer," she said. "When I was looking for anything useful." She looked down. "I didn't know if it was relevant." "It's relevant," Harry said. "It might be why." She stopped. "Why the hat knew what it was doing," Harry finished. She met his eyes. "The old houses aren't just history. They have sympathies. Resonances. My grandmother used to say that houses that worked together left marks in their magic." She paused. "I don't know if that's old wives' tale or genuine." "I think most old wives' tales are genuine," Harry said. "People just stopped reading them carefully." Tracy appeared at the common room door, saw them, came over, dropped onto the rug, and said, "Tell me everything about Gringotts and don't leave out the parts that sound complicated because those are the important ones." Harry looked at Daphne. Daphne looked at Harry. And something shifted, barely perceptibly, in the dynamic of the two chairs, something that moved, like water finding its level, toward the shape it was going to eventually become. "Right," Harry said. "From the beginning." And he told them. All of it. Chapter 4, Politics and Parseltongue. November arrived like someone had reached into the sky and turned a dial. The warmth drained out of the grounds overnight, the lake went from dark blue to something closer to pewter, and the castle corridors developed drafts that moved with the specific purposefulness of drafts that had been using the same routes for 900 years and were not going to adjust for anyone. Harry barely noticed. He was busy. The weeks after Gringotts had a different quality to them, fuller, more layered, as though he'd been looking at a map and someone had handed him the legend. He knew now what the Potter name meant in terms of weight and position. He knew the shape of the estate. He'd sent 2 letters to Sharpclaw about the Godric's Hollow property, not to access it yet, just to understand what sealed meant and who had the authority to unseal it. He'd read the Potter family book twice and was now working through a more detailed genealogical text he'd had to request through the library's restricted catalogue, which Madame Pants had allowed him access to with the expression of someone who had expected this to happen eventually. He was also preparing for the first Quidditch match, doing his homework with the focused efficiency of someone who respected the subject matter, attending his weekly meetings with Dumbledore, practicing his wand work in the evenings, and managing the political geography of Slytherin House, which had settled into something more stable than the first 2 weeks but was still a landscape that rewarded attention. And he was watching Quirrell. The incident with the Parseltongue, as Harry had predicted, could not be contained to just Neville. Neville had not told anyone. Harry had known he wouldn't. Neville kept his word with the completeness of someone for whom integrity was structural rather than chosen. But the greenhouse had had other occupants, and one of them had been close enough to the window to hear something, and that something had moved through the second-year Gryffindor population and then through the school generally in the way that interesting information moves through communities that have too little of it and too much time in cold corridors. By the second week of November, it had reached a sufficient number of people that Harry decided the active management of it was overdue. He chose potions. Specifically, he chose the moment during the potion brewing component of Wednesday's double potions when Snape moved between the benches with his evaluating attention and paused beside Harry's cauldron with the particular quality of pause that meant he was looking for something to critique. The potion was a forgetfulness potion, straightforward for the level, requiring precision on the lacewing fly-wing addition and patience during the 3rd stir, and Harry's was exactly correct, because Harry had read the recipe 6 times and understood the underlying chemistry of it, and there was nothing to critique. Snape looked at the potion. Looked at Harry. Looked at the potion again. "The color is acceptable," Snape said, which was the closest he'd come to a compliment since September. "Thank you, sir," Harry said. Then, because the moment was correct, I wanted to mention something. About an incident in herbology 3 weeks ago. He kept his voice at a level audible to Snape and to Daphne beside him and to no one else without effort. "A snake was caught in the greenhouse trellis. I spoke to it. Parseltongue." He met Snape's eyes. "I wanted you to know directly rather than through the general rumor." Snape was very still. Not the stillness of surprise, Snape controlled surprise, but the stillness of rapid, controlled consideration. "And you are telling me," Snape said quietly, rather than keeping it private, because I don't keep things private that are better handled openly," Harry said. "And because I thought you should hear it from me." He paused. "Given your history with my mother." The potions classroom continued around them, bubbling cauldrons, students watching their timers, the smell of lacewing wings and something astringent. Snape's expression was, in its depths, doing something that wasn't accessible from the surface, but the surface itself had changed quality slightly, like a stone that had been rained on. "I see," Snape said. He was quiet for a moment. 10 points to Slytherin. For the potion. He moved on down the bench without further comment. Daphne, beside Harry, said nothing. But her knee briefly touched his under the bench, once, a small deliberate contact, and then moved away. Harry interpreted this correctly as well handled and went back to his 3rd stir. After potions, in the corridor, Draco Malfoy found them. Not the calculated interception of the previous month, this felt faster, less prepared, the approach of someone whose information had just arrived and who was still deciding what to do with it. "Parseltongue," Draco said. "Not quite an accusation. Not quite not one." "Yes," Harry said. "You're a Parselmouth." "Also yes." Draco looked at him with an expression that was genuinely complicated. Harry could see the competing vectors in it. His family's tradition treated Parseltongue as a marker of old blood, of Slytherin lineage, of distinction. His personal opposition to Harry was running directly into that cultural inheritance. My father says, Draco said carefully, that Parseltongue is a rare gift. That the Gaunt line carried it. That Salazar Slytherin himself, I know the history, Harry said. Then you know it's not, Draco stopped. Reorganized. Some people will say it's dark. Some people say everything interesting is dark, Harry said. That doesn't make them right. He looked at Draco steadily. Did you have a specific point, or was this a check-in? Draco's jaw tightened. The social force of what he'd come to do had been deflected, and he was recalibrating. My father is coming to the Quidditch match on Saturday, he said. He'd like to meet you. Harry looked at him for a moment. Lucius Malfoy at the Quidditch match was not unexpected. Draco had mentioned it twice in passing in the common room, with the particular offhand quality of something you want people to know without appearing to care whether they know. What it meant was, my father is important and his interest in you is a statement about your value. I'll be playing in the match, Harry said. After, if there's time. Draco nodded once. The movement had a controlled quality, something filed and noted. He left. Tracy appeared at Harry's elbow with the timing of someone who had been around a corner and had not been around a corner. Lucius Malfoy, she said. Yes. At the match. Apparently. To look at you. Among other things, Harry said. He thought about what Daphne had told him about the Malfoy arrangement, the preliminary discussion, the future contract, the transaction in which Daphne was the currency. Lucius Malfoy coming to the match served multiple purposes. It established Draco's family connection to the school, it was a show of position, and it was a look at the new variable in their plans. Harry would have done the same thing. What are you going to do? Tracy asked. Win the match, Harry said. Then see what Malfoy Sr. has to say. He told Dumbledore about the Parseltongue at their weekly meeting. Dumbledore's reaction was interesting, not surprise, which confirmed that Dumbledore had known or suspected this was possible, but a kind of settled attention, the way someone looks at a pattern they've been watching develop when a piece they expected appears. There is a connection, Dumbledore said carefully. Between your scar and the individual who gave it to you. I believe, and I stress that this is belief rather than certainty, that on the night your parents died, certain aspects of that individual's capabilities may have been impressed upon you in ways we don't fully understand. You're saying Voldemort's abilities transferred to me somehow, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression he used when Harry was more direct than he'd prepared for. Potentially. In some form. That's not necessarily bad, Harry said. No, Dumbledore said, with a slight pause that suggested he was adjusting his model. No, it isn't. What else might have transferred? That, Dumbledore said, is a question I'm still working on the answer to. I would ask for your patience. I'll give you patience in exchange for directness, Harry said. When you know, you tell me. Agreed, Dumbledore said. He said it like he meant it, which Harry had learned by now was different from him saying it like he was going to mean it eventually. This was the real version. Quirrell, Harry said. Last week you said it was a longer conversation. Dumbledore set his hands flat on the desk. Quirrell spent his sabbatical in Eastern Europe, he said. Specifically in an area of Albania known for dark magical history. He was researching, ostensibly, dark defensive counter-theory. He looked at Harry. He came back changed. More confident in some ways. In other ways, divided. Divided, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him steadily. I am watching the situation, he said. I want to be very clear with you, Harry, there is something on the third-floor corridor that Quirrell wants. Something I have taken steps to protect. But the protection is layered and intended to be tested, and I am watching how it is tested and by whom. Harry absorbed this. "You've set a trap," he said. "I've arranged things so that someone who wants what's in that corridor will reveal themselves in the attempt to get it," Dumbledore said. "It is not a trap in the sense of being designed to catch immediately. It is more in the nature of a test of the obstacle. And if the obstacle fails?" "I am nearby," Dumbledore said simply. Harry thought about this. He thought about Quirrell's searching eyes on the first night, about the troll on Halloween, let in, Harry was almost certain, about the half-second of real competence visible under the performance. He thought about something in Albania, something that had changed Quirrell, something that now lived in Quirrell in the space between the man and his pretense. "What's on the third floor?" Harry asked. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression of someone deciding exactly how much rope to give out. "Something I'd prefer you to stay away from," he said. "That's not an answer. It is the answer I'm able to give tonight." He held Harry's eyes. "I ask you to trust me on this specific point for a specific period of time. I am not hiding it because I think you can't handle it. I'm asking you to step back because this particular thing is better resolved by patience than by direct approach." Harry sat with this for a moment. He was not afraid of Dumbledore. He was not afraid of Quirrell or whatever was behind Quirrell. But he recognized genuine strategy when he encountered it, and he recognized the difference between being managed and being trusted. "How long?" Harry said. "The end of term," Dumbledore said. "All right," Harry said. "But I'm not going to pretend I haven't noticed things." "I wouldn't ask you to," Dumbledore said. "That would be rather like asking the wind not to blow." The Quidditch match on Saturday was Slytherin versus Gryffindor. Harry had been at 3 practices with the full team and had understood, by the end of the first practice, that Flint's team was technically rough in several positions but deeply committed in a way that experience would eventually sharpen into something dangerous. Flint himself played with the focused aggression of someone who had decided winning was not negotiable. The beaters, Bowl and Derek, were effectively large missiles with minor guidance systems. The chasers were inconsistent but occasionally brilliant. Harry's job was simple. Find the snitch before the other seeker. Everything else was noise. He sat in the changing room before the match and listened to Flint's team talk, which was long and loud and covered territorial defense, bludger strategy, and what Flint thought of Gryffindor's keeper in terms that would not have been publishable. Harry let it wash past him and thought about Gryffindor's seeker, a third year called Charlie Weasley's brother, he'd been told, which meant he'd been watching it for 2 years and had instinct but not the edge Harry had, which was that Harry genuinely didn't know what fear during flight felt like and therefore wouldn't pull back. He flew out into the November cold and the roar of the crowd rose around him and he tilted his Nimbus 2000 upward and climbed to the height of the goalposts and waited. The game below him was chaos almost immediately, Flint's aggression setting the tempo, Gryffindor's chasers fast and precise, the bludgers moving in the specific anarchic patterns of things that couldn't be predicted. Harry hovered above it and searched. He was aware, in the abstract, of the crowd. He was aware of the commentary, a Gryffindor boy named Lee Jordan who was describing the action with what appeared to be the complete absence of pretense of impartiality. He was aware of the teacher stands, where Quirrell sat very still under his turban, and where the figure beside McGonagall was watching Harry with the particular attention of someone conducting an assessment. He searched. The snitch appeared at 12 minutes, a gold flicker near the ground on the Gryffindor end, and Harry was already moving before the thought was fully formed, the Nimbus responding like an extension of his body, and then the Gryffindor seeker was beside him and they were both diving and the crowd sound became undifferentiated noise and the gold thing was below him, moving toward the goal post base. And Harry pulled his broom to vertical and dropped straight down and the snitch went left and his hand went left and closed. He pulled up 6 feet from the ground and opened his fist and the snitch was there, struggling, golden wings beating against his palm. The Slytherin stand erupted. Harry could feel the vibration of it even at this height. He landed and Flint hit him on the back with a force that nearly knocked him sideways, and the team surrounded him in a mass of green, and somewhere in the noise was Tracy's voice producing a very specific celebratory sound that she'd apparently been saving. He caught Daphne's eye across the pitch. She was in the Slytherin stands with Tracy's vacated seat beside her, dressed in green and silver with the studied composure of someone who was genuinely pleased and was choosing how much of it to show. What she showed was small but real, a slight lift of her chin, a look that communicated something without requiring words for it. Harry held her gaze for a moment, then turned to deal with Flint, who had opinions about the post-match celebration that were going to require management. Lucius Malfoy was near the pitch entrance, standing with the particular stillness of someone who does not wait for people but permits them to arrive. He was tall, blonde, and looked like Draco would look in 20 years if Draco's features hardened and his education completed, which were both things that were going to happen. He had a silver-handled cane that Harry assessed, in the first second of seeing it, as not decorative. He was looking at Harry with the specific interest of someone whose models are very good and who has just encountered data that doesn't fit them. Draco was beside him. Draco looked, for the first time since September, slightly unsure. Standing adjacent to his father made visible something that was usually hidden, a need to perform, a reaching for approval in every small movement. Harry walked to them with his nimbus over his shoulder and his Quidditch robe still on. "Mr. Potter," Lucius said. His voice was smooth, calibrated to the precise degree of warmth that communicated interest without deference. "Mr. Malfoy," Harry said. "An impressive performance." The assessment was genuine. Lucius Malfoy was many things, but Harry suspected he was honest about quality when he saw it. The Nimbus 2000. "My son tells me you purchased it yourself." "Yes," Harry said. "You have good taste." "Thank you." Lucius looked at him with the specific patience of a man who was accustomed to conversations moving at his pace, who was now slightly recalibrating because Harry was not filling the silence in the way he'd expected. "I understand," he said, "that you've been quite active since your arrival at Hogwarts. Interesting choices." "I try to make good ones," Harry said. A slight pause. "The Declaration," Lucius said, keeping his voice pleasant. "I've had occasion to discuss it with the Greengrass family. Cyrus is a reasonable man. I'm sure he and your guardian—" "I don't have a guardian," Harry said. "I have a trustee, and the trust is under review." He met Lucius's eyes without effort. "The declaration was made under old code law, witnessed publicly, and is formally valid. I understand your family had an informal preliminary discussion with the Greengrass family about a future arrangement. An informal preliminary discussion has no legal standing against a formal declaratory protection." Lucius was very still. "I've read the relevant statutes," Harry said. "I'm happy to discuss the specific clauses if that would be helpful." "You are 11 years old," Lucius said, and for the first time there was something under the smooth surface, not quite anger, something more controlled than anger, but with anger's heat under it. "Yes," Harry said pleasantly. "I am." He tilted his head slightly. "Your son is also 11. The conversations about Daphne Greengrass's future presumably involved him at some level. We're both the same age." Draco, beside his father, had gone very still. Lucius looked at Harry for a long moment. A man who had spent 30 years navigating the corridors of wizarding power, who had been on the winning side in one war and survived it, who had built a network of influence and obligation with the patient precision of someone who understood that power was not seized but constructed. This man was looking at 11-year-old Harry Potter and doing something very specific with his expression, something that was the precursor to a decision. "You are," Lucius said slowly, "quite unlike what I expected." "People keep telling me that," Harry said. "I suspect," Lucius said, "that you will continue to be." He adjusted the grip on his cane. "I look forward to observing your development, Mr. Potter. My son speaks of you with great feeling." "Tell him to speak to me directly," Harry said. "It's more efficient." Lucius looked at him for one more moment. Then he inclined his head, a very small inclination, almost imperceptible, but there, and turned and walked toward the castle entrance. Draco stood there for a second, clearly unsure of the protocol. Then he looked at Harry with an expression that was, for the first time, stripped of the performance layers, not friendly, not yet, maybe not ever, but something more real than what had been there before. "That was," Draco said, "either very brave or very stupid." "Let me know when you figure out which," Harry said, and went to find his friends. The conversation with Ron Weasley happened on the Monday after the match, because Harry had been waiting for the right moment, and the right moment was always the one where the conversation could be most effective. He found Weasley in the corridor outside the library, coming out while Harry was going in, and he stepped sideways to intercept with the body language of someone who is blocking a path on purpose. Weasley was taller than Harry, red-haired, with freckles and an open face that was currently expressing the particular combination of surprise and defensiveness that meant he'd known this conversation was coming. "Potter," Weasley said. "Weasley," Harry said. "I want to talk about Hermione." Weasley's defensiveness increased. "I didn't say anything that wasn't. What you said made her cry," Harry said. "Simply. Not loudly. In the bathroom on Halloween, alone, which is why she didn't know about the troll until it was outside the door. Which is why 3 of us had to come find her." Weasley opened his mouth. Closed it. "I'm not going to tell you what to think about her," Harry said. "I'm telling you that what you said had a direct consequence, and that consequence was nearly very bad." He looked at Weasley steadily. "You can dislike me. You can think I made the wrong choice about my house. That's fine, those are your opinions." He paused. "But Hermione is smart and kind, and she hasn't done anything to you. She deserves better than being made to cry in bathrooms." Weasley's face had moved through several expressions during this. He was not, Harry had observed over the previous weeks, unintelligent. He was impulsive and had a temper and a tendency to speak before he'd thought the thing through, but he was not stupid, and he was not fundamentally unkind. He was 11, and he'd made a mistake the way 11-year-olds made mistakes, with full commitment and no anticipation of consequence. "I know it was wrong," Weasley said. He said it like it cost him something. "I already felt awful about it, then with the troll." "Tell her," Harry said. "Not me." Weasley looked at him with the expression of someone who had expected a fight and gotten something else. "Why do you care?" he said. "You're Slytherin. She's Gryffindor. She's clever and she reads good books and she helped Neville with his transfiguration," Harry said. "The house system is a building. The people in it are people." Weasley stared at him. "You're really not what I expected," he said. "So I'm told," Harry said, and went into the library. He found Hermione at her usual table. She looked up when he sat down across from her, in the manner of someone who was surprised to find him there but was not unwilling. "Weasley is going to apologize," Harry said. Hermione blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Probably today. Possibly tomorrow. He's the type that needs to let it ferment a little before he acts on it, but it'll happen." Harry opened his defense book. "When he does, it'll be genuine." Hermione looked at him for a long, assessing moment. "Did you talk to him?" "Yes." "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She was quiet, looking at her textbook, not reading it. "Why do you do things like that?" she asked. Not critically. Genuinely puzzled, the way she was puzzled by things that fell outside her existing model of how people behaved. "Because they want doing," Harry said. Hermione looked at him for another moment, then down at her book, and Harry thought he heard the small careful sound of someone quietly recategorizing a person from not sure into certain. Snape came to find Harry on a Wednesday evening. Not to the common room, to the library, where Harry had been for 2 hours working through the theory chapters of a second-year defense text he'd requested and was finding increasingly useful. Snape appeared between 2 shelves with the silent approach of someone who moved that way by instinct and looked at Harry's arrangement of books with an expression that Harry was getting better at reading. "Walk with me," Snape said. Harry put a bookmark in and followed. They walked through the library, down the corridor, and out a side door that led to a narrow stone balcony overlooking the courtyard. It was cold. November had fully committed. Below them, the courtyard torches moved in the wind. Snape stood at the balcony rail with his hands behind his back and his robes moving in the dark and said, "Your mother." "Yes," Harry said. "You mentioned my history with her during potions." He said it without looking at Harry. "That was deliberate." "Yes. You wanted to see how I would react." "Partly," Harry said honestly. "Partly I mentioned it because it was relevant and because I think you're more useful to me as an honest antagonist than a dishonest one." Snape turned his head. The torchlight from below caught the line of his face. "I am not your antagonist." "You're not my ally yet," Harry said. "Which makes you something in between." "I'd rather know where you are." Snape was quiet for a moment. "She was," he said, "the most naturally gifted which I ever knew in the specific area of intent magic. The way she structured intent was, unlike anyone else." He stopped. This was clearly not a rehearsed conversation. "You do it the same way. I have noticed it in potions. The quality of your attention to the work." He paused. "It is not inherited skill. Skill is not inherited. What is inherited is the capacity for a particular kind of focus." Harry absorbed this. "She was good at potions." "She was exceptional," Snape said, and there was something in the word that carried a decade and a half of weight. "What happened?" Harry asked. "Not aggressively. Genuinely." Snape looked at the courtyard. "I made a choice," he said. "Choices have consequences." A pause. "I am not," he said carefully, without awareness of the weight of what happened to her family. "To you." "I know," Harry said. Snape turned to look at him directly. "How do you know?" "Because you've been doing two things at once in potions since September," Harry said. "Looking for evidence that I'm what you expected, arrogant, thoughtless, my father's son in all the worst ways, and finding that I'm not, and not quite knowing what to do with that. The hostility has been decreasing." He paused. "And you gave Hermione points on her Halloween troll incident when McGonagall told you what happened. You didn't have to do that." Snape stared at him. Harry had the sense that very few people said true things directly to Severus Snape, because Snape made it uncomfortable to do so, and that discomfort was largely the point. "You are," Snape said, "extraordinarily perceptive for 11. "I had good teachers," Harry said. "Not at school. Just, in general." Snape turned back to the courtyard. Something moved in his posture, a very small thing, a shift in the set of his shoulders, something that loosened slightly. "Professor Quirrell," he said. Harry looked at him. "I would advise you," Snape said carefully, "to maintain a reasonable academic distance from that particular class. Not in terms of engagement, your performance is adequate." A pause. "In terms of trusting the information offered." "I already had that concern," Harry said. "Naturally," Snape said, without surprise. "Are you watching him too?" "I am watching many things," Snape said. "It is, at present, the appropriate posture." Harry nodded. He thought about what that meant: Snape watching, Dumbledore watching, and Harry watching, all three of them separately observing the same thing and not quite sharing the observation fully. There was, somewhere in that triangle, a conversation that needed to happen and hadn't yet. "Thank you," Harry said. "For telling me about my mother." Snape was quiet for a moment. "She deserved better than what happened," he said. It was spoken to the courtyard, not to Harry. "I have a significant amount of history with that statement." "I know," Harry said. They stood in the November cold for another minute, two people who had found each other strange and were figuring out how to be useful to each other without requiring it to be simple, and then Snape turned and went back inside, and Harry stayed at the rail for another few minutes, looking at the torches moving below. Draco spoke to Harry directly for the first time without an agenda on a Thursday morning. Not an approach, not a move. They were both early for charms, sitting at separate ends of the empty classroom, and Draco said, from across the room, "You're meeting with my father." "What about it?" Harry said, without looking up from his charms notes. "He talked about you at dinner." Harry looked up now. Draco's expression was hard to read. He was not comfortable with this conversation, but he was having it anyway, which meant something. "He said you were either very dangerous or very foolish and that he needed to know which." He paused. "I told him you weren't foolish." Harry held his gaze. "Thank you," he said. "I didn't do it for you," Draco said. "I did it because I don't want my father making inaccurate assessments." "Still a useful thing," Harry said. Draco was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the November sky was doing something gray and noncommittal. "You read all the same things I was taught at home," Draco said. "The old laws. The family structures. The political history." "Yes." "Why?" "Nobody just reads that." "Because I grew up with none of it," Harry said. "If you didn't know what a door was and someone told you there was a door and it was important, you'd read everything you could about doors." Draco looked at him. "That is the strangest analogy I've ever heard." "But accurate," Harry said. A pause. "The Malfoy arrangement with the Greengrass family," Draco said. "I want you to know, I didn't particularly want it either." Harry looked at him carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're going to find out eventually," Draco said. "And because if we're going to be in the same house for 7 years, I'd rather we were clear about what things are." He looked away. "My father's plans are my father's plans. They're not always mine." Harry absorbed this. It was the most honest thing Draco had said to him since September, and it cost him something to say it. Harry could see that in the deliberate casualness of his posture, the careful positioning of someone trying to make a difficult thing look easy. "I appreciate that," Harry said. Draco looked at him, looked away, pulled out his charms textbook. "Don't make it a thing," he said. "I won't," Harry said, and looked back at his notes. Other students began arriving. The conversation was over, but it had changed something, not dramatically, not warmly, but in the way that a lock changes when someone uses the right key. You don't see the mechanism, but the door is different afterward. The corridor outside the girls' bathroom on the second floor had been repaired since Halloween. The troll damage was gone, the stones replaced, and there was no sign of the encounter except that Harry now automatically checked that corridor when he passed it, the way you checked a path you'd navigated in bad conditions. He was passing it on a Friday evening, coming back from the library, when he heard it. Not a voice. Not a sound. A pressure in his mind, the same quality as the greenhouse snake, but different in key. Lower. Older. Something with more weight to it. He stopped. The pressure shaped itself, slowly, into something he could parse. It was coming from behind the wall. Not the bathroom, behind the bathroom, somewhere in the old stonework of the castle. He stood very still and listened, the way he'd learned to listen to things that weren't sound. The thing behind the wall was large. Ancient. Moving slowly. The shape of words that came from it wasn't words at all but more of a feeling, the feeling of something that had been here for a very long time and was aware of the warmth of the living things around it with a slow, enormous patience. Harry put his hand flat on the cold stone and said, very quietly, in that other key, "Are you all right in there?" The movement stopped. The presence focused in a way that was like a very large, very old thing turning its head. Then it said, in that wordless parcel-tongue way, "Warm. Here. Long time. Not hurt." "Okay," Harry said. "Sorry to disturb you." The presence moved away, slow and certain, back into the deeper stone. Harry took his hand off the wall and stood in the corridor and thought about what lived in the walls of Hogwarts, and about Salazar Slytherin, and about the chamber that the history books mentioned in the kind of brief, careful way that suggested something people knew existed but preferred to leave unlocked. He did not go looking for it. He filed it under significant things I know about and will address when the time is right, and went back to the common room. But he thought about it. The defense class 2 weeks before end of term was on practical shielding charms, and Quirrell demonstrated the Protego shield with a brisk competence that was several levels above what a first-year class required, which confirmed Harry's long-running assessment that whatever Quirrell was performing, it was not his actual skill level. The specific wrongness Harry had been cataloguing sharpened in that lesson. Quirrell's eyes were restless in a way they hadn't been in September. Something was building in him, not quite desperation, but an increasing intensity, the quality of someone who had a deadline that was not being met. After class Harry walked beside Neville down the corridor, and Neville said, "Is it just me or was Quirrell?" "No," Harry said. "It's not just you." "He seemed pressured," Neville said, with the careful vocabulary of someone who noticed emotional states and was precise about naming them. "Like something is pushing at him." "Yes," Harry said. "From inside," Neville said, more quietly. Harry looked at him. "I've seen that before," Neville said, and didn't elaborate, but something in his eyes said it was a genuine comparison and that the history of it was not comfortable. "Stay away from the third-floor corridor," Harry said. Neville looked at him. "Is that where it is?" "Yes." "What is it?" "I don't know yet," Harry said. "I have a guess. But stay away from it." "Right," Neville said. "I wasn't planning to go up there anyway." "Good," Harry said. "You're more sensible than I am." Neville laughed. It had become, over the past 2 months, an easy laugh, the laugh of someone who was discovering that his own instincts were reliable and that had relaxed something in him. He was still nervous in crowds, still deferential in ways that didn't serve him, but the essential quality of him, the genuine, attentive, deeply feeling person underneath, was becoming more visible every week. Harry thought that was one of the better developments of the term. The last week before Christmas break arrived with the force of something that had been approaching for a while and was now simply present. The castle acquired a specific smell, pine, cold stone, something sweet from the kitchens, and the decorations appeared on the morning of the 18th with the completeness of things that had been prepared somewhere and deployed all at once. Harry had written to the Dursleys, briefly, to inform them that he would not be returning for Christmas. Not asking permission. Informing them. He'd also written to Petunia separately, noting that the trust payment had been discontinued, that he wished her no ill will, and that he considered the obligation she'd been maintaining, imperfectly, but maintaining, as discharged. He'd written that last part because it was true and because leaving people in a state of unclear debt was inefficient. Petunia had not written back. He hadn't expected her to. He'd written to Gringotts scheduling a full main vault access for the first Saturday of the new year. He'd written to a wizarding solicitor whose name appeared twice in the Potter family book, a woman named Clearwater, asking about the status of the Godric's Hollow property and the London house. And he'd written one more letter, which he'd drafted 4 times before sending, to Sirius Black, or rather, to the address Sharpclaw had given him, a magical forwarding address maintained through Gringotts, which meant the addressee had registered intent to receive post without registering a location. Which meant someone who was somewhere and wanted occasionally to be found. He'd written, "My name is Harry Potter. I understand you were my parents' friend and my godfather. I'd like to correspond, if you're willing. H.P." He didn't know if it would reach him or get a response. But he'd sent it. On the second to last evening before break, in the window alcove, with the grounds below already holding a thin covering of snow, he told Daphne all of this. She listened in the way she listened to important things. When he finished about Sirius Black, she was quiet for a moment. "He was in Azkaban," she said. "I know. He was convicted for betraying my parents." Harry looked out the window. "I've read the trial records. Or, the record of the trial, because there wasn't really one. He was sent to Azkaban without a trial. Daphne stared at him. Without a trial. He was never given a Wiesengemot hearing. He was arrested and sentenced and placed in Azkaban within 48 hours, and there is no transcript because there was no hearing. Harry paused. I found it in the Ministry Records section at the back of the Magical Law Archive in the library. It's not filed prominently. He might be guilty, Daphne said. Carefully. Not arguing against him, but thinking out loud with the precision she brought to important problems. The absence of a trial doesn't mean innocence. No, Harry agreed. But it means injustice regardless. And it means he never got to speak. He looked at the snow on the grounds. I want to hear his side. Daphne nodded slowly. Your father's best friend, she said. Your godfather. If he's innocent, he spent 10 years in Azkaban for something he didn't do, because someone was in too much of a hurry to make sure, Harry said. And that's something that needs fixing. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the same window he was looking at. You take on a lot, she said. Someone has to. Not necessarily you. No, Harry agreed. Not necessarily. But I have the information and the position and the capacity, and it needs doing, so. He shrugged, a small movement. Here we are. Daphne looked at him. In the cold blue light from the window, her expression was open in the specific way it only was in this alcove, in these late evening conversations, the composed surface still present but with something alive and particular showing through it. You're going to try to get him out, she said. Not quite a question. Not this year, Harry said. I don't have the standing yet. But I'm building it. She nodded. Looked back out the window. A minute passed. My father's letter last week, she said. About Christmas. He says if I stay at school, the Malfoy arrangement conversation will happen at Easter instead. He's not going to let it go. I know, Harry said. He's not the type. I need a formal response prepared, she said. Something with legal standing. Something that says the abeyance is not indefinite and that the old code protection has been formally entered into the family records. Harry had actually already done this, had filed the declaration with Gringotts 3 weeks ago, where it sat in the magical record as a formal social contract alongside the Potter estate management changes. He told her this. She turned to look at him. You filed it already? On the Gringotts visit, Harry said. I thought it was worth having on record regardless of what the abeyance resolved to. The protection has legal standing now whether you decide to proceed or not. She looked at him for a long time. Something was happening in her expression, the architecture of it, the careful construction, was showing its foundations in a way it rarely did. Not collapse. More like intentional transparency. Choosing to let him see. I'm not good at this, she said. People. Letting people in. She said the last word like it was a language she was learning. I know, Harry said. I keep waiting for you to want something from it. I want you to be all right, Harry said simply. That's it. She was quiet. The snow outside was very still. Somewhere in the castle, distantly, someone was playing music, one of the upper common rooms, something slow and seasonal. The Parseltongue, she said, after a while. When the snake came off your shoulder in the greenhouse. Yes? What did it feel like, she asked. Speaking it. Harry thought about this. Like switching languages, he said. Not translating, actually switching. Like there's a part of my brain that runs in a different key and it just activates. Is it scary? No, Harry said. Is anything scary? He considered the question properly, because it deserved a proper answer. Losing people I've decided matter, he said. That's the only one I've found so far. She looked at him. "That list," he said, "is getting longer than it was in September." And Daphne Greengrass, who was composed and careful and had never in her memory let herself be moved by something she couldn't control, looked out at the snow and did not say anything, but her hand, resting on the stone between them, moved very slightly in his direction. Harry did not move toward it. He let it be what it was, the smallest, most deliberate gesture, offered freely, and looked back out at the grounds, where the snow was still falling in the quiet dark. Chapter 5. The Mirror and the Stone. Christmas at Hogwarts was a different creature entirely from Christmas anywhere Harry had previously experienced it, which was to say it was the first Christmas he'd experienced that was actually Christmas rather than a day in which the Dursleys celebrated extensively around him while he watched from the perimeter and tried not to take up too much space. The castle transformed itself on the morning of the 23rd when the last train of students departed, and the transformation was not subtle. Someone, the elves, presumably, though Harry had only a theoretical understanding of them at this point, had dressed every corridor and staircase and common room in evergreen and candlelight, and the great hall had acquired 12 Christmas trees so large that their tops disappeared into the enchanted ceiling, and the enchanted ceiling had committed to winter, showing a grey-white sky heavy with snow that actually fell, very lightly, on the house tables without making anything wet, which Harry considered one of the more charming examples of magic he'd encountered. The castle population at Christmas was a small and specific thing. Most of the remaining students were the ones with no place better to be, which Harry understood was not a sad category but simply an honest one, and some of them were people who had chosen to stay because the castle at Christmas was genuinely beautiful and they'd learned the value of that. The teachers who stayed had a different quality to them, more human, less formal, moving through the corridors with the particular ease of people in their home when the house is mostly empty. Harry, Daphne, and Tracy had stayed. Neville had been collected by his grandmother with the specific energy of a woman who had decided her grandson needed a proper Christmas if she had to personally ensure it, and had pressed Harry's hand on the platform with a grip that communicated several things about family obligation and then said, with absolute sincerity, "You're a good influence on him. Don't squander it." Harry had promised not to. Hermione had gone home to her parents, whose existence Harry had found unexpectedly moving, two ordinary people who had no idea what their daughter was, precisely, and loved her without categories. She'd left him a book. Uncommon Magical Theory, Essays in the Borderlands of Known Practice. The note inside said, "For the person who reads everything. This one's worth reading. Happy Christmas. H.G." He'd started it on the train platform and finished the first 3 chapters walking back from seeing her off. Ron Weasley, who had apologized to Hermione on the Thursday after Harry suggested it, with the gruff sincerity of someone paying a debt they'd rather not acknowledge but intended to honor, had gone home to the burrow. He and Harry had achieved something that wasn't quite friendship but was in the direction of mutual respect, the kind that exists between people who have decided to evaluate each other honestly rather than from the position of expectation. It was fragile and possibly would not survive the next disagreement, but it was real. The 5 of them, Harry, Daphne, Tracy, and 2 seventh-years who seemed to be conducting a private research project in the library and surface visible only at meals, had the castle largely to themselves. It was, Harry thought, the best possible version of a thing he hadn't known he'd been missing. The morning of Christmas Eve, Harry was up before light again and dressed and went not to the common room but to the Quidditch pitch, which he discovered during November was entirely his at 5 in the morning, empty and cold and enormous, the stands a dark geometric against the grey-purple sky, the grass below silver with frost. He flew for an hour. No practice drills, no snitch hunting. Just flew, high, then low, speed and then stillness, the nimbus responsive beneath him with the specific joy of good equipment well used. He flew because it was the one thing that asked nothing of him except to be present in it, the one place where the thinking could stop and the body could be entirely sufficient. He was coming into land when he saw her. Daphne was sitting on the bottom row of the Slytherin stands wrapped in a green wool cloak, her breath making small clouds in the cold, watching him with an expression that was different from her usual ones, less composed, more direct, as though the early morning and the empty pitch had removed the context in which composure was the appropriate tool. Harry landed beside the stands and walked to her. "Early," he said. "I saw you leave," she said. "The dormitory window faces the pitch." She looked at the broom in his hand. "I didn't know you came here in the morning." "Sometimes," Harry said. "When I need to not think for a while." She looked out at the frost-pale pitch. "Does it help?" "Always." He sat on the row below hers, turned at an angle so he could see both her and the grounds. "You?" "I walk," she said. "Early. When the castle's quiet." A pause. "I walked to the 4th floor last week and the staircases kept rerouting and I ended up somewhere I'd never been before. A corridor with paintings of the sea." She said it with the slightly surprised quality of someone who hasn't processed something yet and is only now doing so. "All of them just ocean. Nothing else. I sat in front of one for about 20 minutes. "Which ocean?" She looked at him. "What? Which ocean was it?" "They're different. The North Sea looks nothing like the Mediterranean." She was quiet for a moment. "Green-gray. Very dark. High waves." "North Sea," Harry said. "Or the Atlantic." He looked at the grounds. "I've never seen the sea." "Not actually seen it." Daphne blinked. "Never?" "The Dursleys didn't take family trips," Harry said simply. Something moved in her expression, not pity, she was constitutionally opposed to pity, but something more active than sympathy. A registering of facts. "Next summer," she said, and it was so matter-of-fact that it took Harry a moment to understand what she was doing. "Next summer what?" he said. "The Greengrass estate has a property in Cornwall. Above the cliff." She looked at him evenly. "You could see the sea from there." Harry looked at her. She was looking back at him with the specific quality she used for important things, direct and clear, the way she was when she decided something was worth saying regardless of its exposure. "Abeyance," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "Still." "Yes," she said, again. "But not indefinitely." And then, before he could respond to this, she stood up and said, "Breakfast will start soon," and walked back toward the castle with her cloak pulled against the cold. Harry sat on the Quidditch stand in the frost and looked at the space she'd left and thought, for the first time in his life, about Cornwall. Christmas Day arrived with the specific magic of a castle that had decided to be extraordinary about it. Harry woke to a pile of packages at the foot of his bed that startled him badly, not because he hadn't expected gifts, Tracy had mentioned the tradition and Hermione had explained the logistics, but because the scale of it exceeded his model. A Weasley sweater had arrived somehow from Molly Weasley, green with a small golden H, accompanying a note that said she was delighted he was friends with Neville and had enclosed a tin of fudge. From Neville, a small book on magical herb properties in potion brewing. From Hermione, a second book, a text on the theory of magical resonance that she'd found and clearly agonized over whether he'd already have, accompanied by a note saying if you've read it already please don't tell me until January. From Tracy, a small jar of a very expensive potions ingredient, fluxweed, from the correct lunar phase, that she'd sourced somehow and labeled with a card that said for your inevitably impressive second-year potions performance. From Daphne, a small flat package, carefully wrapped. Inside was a slim leather notebook, dark green, with no label or decoration except a small silver clasp, and inside the front cover in her precise handwriting, for the person who reads everything. "This one's for writing." Harry held it for a moment, then set it on his bedside table with the particular care of something that mattered. He went down to breakfast. The Great Hall had doubled down on its commitment to Christmas, the 12 trees fully lit, the enchanted ceiling doing something magnificent with actual morning sunlight breaking through enchanted winter clouds. The remaining students were gathered at one end of the long table, which had been moved to accommodate them more naturally, and there was food and warmth and that specific quality of a small group of people who have been left with each other long enough to stop performing. Daphne received Harry's gift to her, a set of first-edition Wizarding Law volumes that he'd tracked through a specialist catalog and ordered through Madame Pants, 3 slim books in a dark red case, annotated by a Wisengamot member in the 1930s with marginal commentary that Sharpclaw had described as legally significant and underappreciated. She opened the case at the breakfast table and looked at the books with an expression that was still and very complete, the way she looked at things that mattered to her when she was deciding how much of the mattering to show. She showed enough. Harry counted it as sufficient. Tracy unwrapped everything she'd received with the thoroughness of someone conducting an audit and catalogued her gifts aloud with the running commentary of someone who finds life funnier than it finds itself. After breakfast, Harry intended to go to the library. He did not go to the library. What happened was this: walking from the great hall toward the staircase, he turned down a corridor he hadn't used before. The castle rerouted him with the gentle insistence it sometimes applied to first years still learning its geography, and found himself in a long corridor lined with empty suits of armor that was catching the morning light in gold-angled bars across the stone floor, and at the far end of the corridor was a door that was not quite closed. He pushed it open. Inside was a classroom, clearly unused for some time, desks pushed to the walls, the blackboard blank, dust on the windowsills. And against the far wall, as though placed there by someone who had considered its location carefully, stood a large ornate mirror. Harry almost left. He'd intended the library and he was behind schedule, and the mirror was interesting, but mirrors were not immediately pressing. He took 3 more steps into the room. The mirror was tall, taller than the doorway it hadn't come through without magic, framed in ornate gold that had darkened with age. Across the top, carved into the frame, were words that Harry read with the automatic absorption of someone who read everything: Erist stra eru oit uber kafru oit onwosi. He decoded it without effort. I show not your face but your heart's desire. He looked into the mirror. He had a moment, just a moment, of expecting it to show him something obvious. His parents. A family he didn't have. The cupboard door open. The mirror showed him a room. He recognized it, or didn't recognize it, but felt it. A kitchen, large and warm, with the smell of food and the sound of voices, the specific domestic noise of a house that was full of people who were there because they wanted to be. Himself in the mirror, standing in the doorway of that kitchen, older than he was now, not much older, a few years, with people around him that he could almost see, tall shapes and small shapes, someone's laughter, a girl with silver blonde hair at a table reading something. A man with a deep bark of a laugh somewhere to the left, visible only as presence and warmth. Not grand. Not glory. A kitchen full of people who were his. Harry stood in front of the mirror for a long time. He was aware of the nature of the object: it showed desire, and desire could trap more actions. Right, the next chapter now. Chapter 6. What he's worth. The final chamber was cold in the way that deep places are cold, not the cold of weather but the cold of stone that had never been warm, that had been underground since the castle was built and had simply held its temperature against the centuries. The walls were black rock, and in the center of the room, exactly as Harry had last seen it in the abandoned classroom, stood the mirror of Erist. Quirrell was standing in front of it. He had his back to them when they came through the fire, and Harry had a single second to take in the full picture before Quirrell turned. The posture was different. Not the hunched, uncertain posture of the defense classroom. He was standing straight, and the quality of his stillness was nothing like the performed nervousness Harry had catalogued all year. This was a man at the end of something, standing at the threshold of what he'd been working toward, and the relief in his posture was the relief of someone who has carried a weight so long they'd stopped feeling it and were now, finally, setting it down. He turned when he heard them. His face was different too. The nervous adjustment, the over-earnest smile, gone. What was left was a face that was tired and certain and looking at Harry with the specific attention of someone who had been told this would happen and had been deciding, all year, how they felt about it. "Potter," he said. No stutter. "I wondered if you'd come." "You knew about the monitoring," Harry said. "I disabled it." He tilted his head slightly. "I disabled most things tonight." I've had the plan assembled for 3 months. His eyes moved to Daphne, briefly, with the assessing quality of someone who hadn't expected to. Greengrass. You're more thorough than anticipated. Complaining won't help, Daphne said evenly. Something moved in Quirrell's expression, not quite amusement, but in the neighborhood. No, he said. I suppose it won't. He looked back at Harry. Come and look at this, Potter. I've been standing here for 20 minutes and I can't see the stone. I can only see myself giving it to he stopped. Reorganized. I need someone who doesn't want to use it. I know, Harry said. He walked forward slowly, taking in the room as he went, single entrance, which was where they'd come from, no other doors, the mirror in the center and Quirrell between Harry and it. The man's wand was in his hand but held loosely, which meant either confidence or a trap, and Harry was measuring both. The question, Harry said, stopping about 8 feet from Quirrell, is why you want it. Quirrell looked at him. You know why. I know what Voldemort wants it for, Harry said. I'm asking about you. A pause. Something shifted in Quirrell's face, a small, involuntary movement, the kind that happens when someone encounters a question they've been trying not to answer. He promised me things, Quirrell said. Then, quieter, I found him in Albania. I thought he was weakened enough that I could use him. Take what he knew and not, he stopped. I was wrong about that. He got into your head, Harry said. He already is in my head, Quirrell said, and there was something in the way he said it that was very tired and not entirely hostile. He's been in my head since October of last year and I am, significantly less myself than I was. Every month there is less of me. He looked at Harry steadily. He wants the stone to restore his body. If he has a body, he doesn't need mine. He paused. You understand what I'm telling you. You want out, Harry said. Quirrell's jaw tightened. I want what I had before I made the mistake of going to Albania. He offers the stone as the price of my freedom. He shrugged, and the movement was rigid, constrained, the movement of someone who had limited access to their own muscles. Whether or not that promise is worth anything, I don't know. But it's what I have. It's not worth anything, Harry said. He doesn't keep promises to people he's already discarded. You know that. Yes, Quirrell said. I do. And for a moment his face was entirely his own, and it was the face of a man who was very frightened and very trapped and had been both for so long that they'd become his baseline. Then something changed in his eyes, a pressure, a darkness behind the expression that was not Quirrell's, and when he spoke again the voice had a different quality to it, a second layer underneath. The boy, the voice said. Not quite Quirrell's. Deeper, resonant with something that had no body to carry it and was using his borrowed one at significant cost. You've been informed about me, I see. Yes, Harry said. And yet you came anyway. Yes. That is either very brave or very stupid, said the voice that was and wasn't Quirrell. Daphne, beside Harry, said under her breath, that's what Draco said. The stone, Potter, the voice continued, through Quirrell's mouth, with the specific patience of something that had been waiting for a decade and had learned to wear patience the way other things wore armor. You will look into the mirror and tell me what you see. That is all I ask. Why would I do that? Harry said. Because if you don't, your companion will be harmed. A pause. You're declared. The Greengrass girl. Harry felt Daphne go very still beside him. He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on Quirrell, on the thing behind Quirrell, with the level attention he brought to things that were trying to make him afraid. No, Harry said. A pause. No. No, Harry said again. You'll harm her regardless once you have the stone. Threatening her to get my compliance and then removing the threat isn't your pattern. Your pattern is to leave nothing that can be a problem later. He held Quirrell's eyes, or Voldemort's eyes, the distinction had collapsed. Threatening her doesn't work because it assumes I think you'll keep your word about not harming her. I don't. The room was very quiet. So, Harry said, here's what I think happens next. I don't look in the mirror. You hurt someone or try to. I respond to that. And at some point in the next hour Dumbledore arrives because Tracy Davis is the most efficient person in this castle and she will have sent that message inside 10 minutes of leaving. He paused. So the question isn't whether you get the stone. You don't. The question is what you do with the next hour. Something moved on the back of Quirrell's head. Harry had a half-second of preparation, not much, but the half-second of someone who had been paying attention all year and had been doing wand work practice every evening and who had read, in the theory text from November, that the specific vulnerability of a possessing spirit was the connection between host and presence, that the spiritual attachment was not the same as physical merger, that there was a seam. The turban unwound itself. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was chalk-white and flat, with eyes that were barely slits, crimson and slit-pupilled, and a face that was the remnant of something that had burned away everything that wasn't will. It looked at Harry with the specific attention of something that had, across the distance of a decade, thought about this moment and was finding the reality of it different from any version it had imagined. Harry Potter, it said. In its own voice, finally. Thin and high and carrying the specific resonance of something that had been forced into a register it wasn't built for. The boy who survived. The boy who survived, Harry said. Yes. Do you know, Voldemort said, what you could be? With the right guidance. With the right, no, Harry said. You haven't heard, I don't need to, Harry said. You're going to tell me that power matters and that the right side isn't the side everyone thinks, and that there's a place for me on your side, and that my parents died for nothing, and that I could choose differently. He looked at the red eyes. I've heard that speech. Not from you specifically, but from every person who ever tried to use me by telling me it was my idea. He tilted his head. I grew up with people like you. You're a better version, but the shape is the same. You want something and you've decided that the best way to get it is to make me feel like helping you is my own choice. Voldemort was very still. Quirrell's body was rigid, the strain of dual occupancy visible now in the way his hands shook slightly and his skin had gone to the color of old paper. Your mother died for love, Voldemort said, and there was something in his voice that was almost philosophical, almost wondering, like a scientist regarding an outcome they still don't quite believe. A useless, human, small thing. And it stopped me. A decade ago. Do you understand how impossible that should be? How thoroughly it should have been insufficient? I understand it completely, Harry said. Then you understand what you carry. Yes, Harry said. I do. He raised his wand. Voldemort looked at it. One first-year wand, he said. Against everything I am. You're not very much right now, Harry said. You're the back of a man's head. You're a voice and a borrowed face and a plan that didn't work. He kept his wand level. What exactly are you afraid I'll do? And here was the thing, the specific thing that Harry had worked out in the last 30 seconds from the quality of Voldemort's attention, from the way those red eyes had been moving between him and the mirror with the specific calculation of something that was reassessing its options very fast. He wasn't afraid of what Harry would do. He was afraid of what Harry was. Your mother's magic, Voldemort said slowly. The sacrifice. It lives in you. In your skin. The red eyes narrowed. I can feel it from here. Ancient protective magic, burning under your blood. A pause. I cannot touch you. I know, Harry said. He took 3 steps forward and put his hand on Quirrell's face. What happened was not what Harry had planned, because he hadn't had a plan beyond the connection is where the vulnerability is, and if the sacrifice magic in my blood is real then it's real right now. He'd moved on instinct, the same instinct that had carried him through everything that year, the same cold, precise instinct of someone who had learned that waiting for the right plan sometimes meant waiting too long. The contact was like completing a circuit. The heat came from his palm, burning white, and where his hand met Quirrell's face the man cried out, not Voldemort's borrowed voice, Quirrell's own voice, high and shocked, the voice of someone whose pain was genuine, and then the black stone room was full of a light that wasn't Harry's, wasn't the mirror's, but was something older than both, something that had been stored in his blood since October of 1981 and had been waiting for the specific conditions of its use. Quirrell crumbled. Not immediately, it took 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds everything in the room was light and heat and the sound of something that was not physical screaming, and Harry kept his hand steady against the force of it, kept his feet, kept his eyes open. Then Quirrell collapsed. The screaming stopped. The light went out. Harry was on his knees on the black stone floor. He didn't remember going to his knees. His hand was shaking and the room was very dark and very cold again, and from somewhere behind him Daphne said his name, said it in the voice she used when something mattered, and then she was beside him on the floor and her hand was on his shoulder and her face was very close and its expression was one he'd never seen on her before, open and unguarded and frightened for someone other than herself. "I'm all right," Harry said. His voice was rougher than he expected. "You're not all right," she said. "I'm mostly all right," he said. "Check Quirrell." She looked at him for a second longer, not satisfied, then moved to Quirrell's body. Harry made himself stand, which took more effort than he preferred, and followed. Quirrell was alive. Barely, his pulse was weak and his breathing was the shallow breathing of someone who had had their life significantly disrupted from the inside out, but alive. The face on the back of his head was gone. The skin there was normal skin, hair, nothing remarkable. Harry looked at it for a moment and thought about the year of lessons Quirrell had delivered, the year of presence, the man trapped inside the borrowed life, and felt something that was not quite grief but was in the same family. "He needs the hospital wing," Harry said. "He needs St. Mungo's," Daphne said. "Hospital wing isn't sufficient for this." In a minute. Harry looked at the mirror. It was still standing, still reflecting, and in it he could see himself and Daphne beside Quirrell's body and the cold stone room and the purple fire at the entrance. No stone visible. The enchantment intact. He looked at his reflection for a moment. The real version of the kitchen was still waiting for him, but it wasn't in here, wasn't in the glass. He turned away from the mirror and that felt like the right choice. "You put your hand on his face," Daphne said, from behind him. "Yes. That was not something I expected." "It wasn't something I planned," Harry said honestly. He flexed his hand. The heat was gone, the burning sensation fading to something like the feeling after holding something cold for too long. "I knew about the protective magic. I read about it in November, sacrifice magic, the specific type, it's old and it binds to the blood of the protected person and it's reactive. It responds to genuine threat." He looked at his palm. "I thought if I made contact, it would respond." "You thought," Daphne said. "I was fairly sure." "Fairly." "Very fairly," Harry said. She looked at him with an expression that was several things at once, relief and exasperation and something else that she was holding together with an effort, the specific effort of someone who has been frightened for another person and is not accustomed to that and doesn't know where to put it. "Very fairly," she repeated, and her voice had a quality in it that Harry thought was the Daphne Greengrass version of a considerable number of feelings compressed into 2 words. Then the purple fire flared and Tracy came through at a dead run, took in the scene, Harry standing, Daphne standing, Quirrell on the floor, no Voldemort, no immediate crisis, and stopped with her hands on her knees breathing hard. "Right," Tracy said. "I ran. I'm not built for running." She straightened up. "I sent the owl." "Dumbledore will, it's done," Harry said. Tracy looked at him. Looked at Daphne. Looked at Quirrell. Looked back at Harry. "You're serious?" "Very," Harry said. "How?" Tracy said, with the tone of someone who has decided this is a question for later, "Are you not more injured?" "Sacrifice magic is protective by nature," Harry said. "It burned what it was aimed at. I just held it." "You just held it," Tracy said. "More or less." "I'm going to need," Tracy said carefully, "the full account. Not tonight. But soon. And you cannot summarize." She pointed at him. "I will know if you summarize." "I know," Harry said. Daphne had moved to Quirrell again, checking his pulse with 2 fingers to his throat, and looked up. "We need to get him to the hospital wing now. He's stable but he needs attention." They managed Quirrell between them, Harry and Daphne with the man's weight distributed, Tracy ahead opening doors and checking corridors with her wand. The castle at 1 in the morning was entirely silent and entirely beautiful, the Christmas decorations lighting the empty corridors in amber and green, the sounds of their footsteps and Quirrell's uneven breathing the only things alive in it. Madame Pomfrey did not take well to being woken at 1 in the morning, but her objection lasted approximately 3 seconds once she saw Quirrell's condition, at which point she became a person entirely without complexity about her priorities, directing them out of the hospital wing and into the corridor with the efficient force of someone managing a critical situation. Harry sat on the floor outside the hospital wing with his back against the stone wall. Daphne sat beside him. Tracy sat on his other side. The 3 of them had the specific quality of people who had been moving very fast and had now stopped and were beginning to understand the extent of what had happened. Harry's head was resting against the stone and he was looking at the ceiling and thinking about the red eyes and the voice, the boy who survived, and about the mirror, and about Quirrell's own voice when the pain had hit him, the human voice under the borrowed one. "He's alive," Daphne said. She didn't say it like a question but it had a question's quality. "Quirrell?" "Yes." Harry paused. "Voldemort, whatever that was, the remnant, the possession, it left. Whether it's truly gone or just dispersed somewhere," he paused. "It's not gone. It's diminished. But it's been diminished before." "You think it'll come back," Tracy said. "I think it always comes back," Harry said. "That's the thing about it. It keeps coming back because it hasn't been properly finished." He looked at the ceiling. "But not tonight. Not this year." They sat in the quiet corridor and the castle breathed around them, old and patient. 900 years of human lives lived within its walls, and right now just 3 11-year-olds sitting on its floor at 1 in the morning having done something the castle had seen versions of before and would probably see versions of again. Dumbledore arrived at 1:30, traveling cloak still on, the specific energy of someone who had been moving very fast and had arrived to find the crisis already resolved. He looked at the 3 of them on the floor and his expression was the real one, the one Harry had first seen in the abandoned classroom on Christmas morning, the one that didn't perform anything. He crouched in front of Harry. Actually crouched, which meant he was closer to eye level and the creak his knees made was entirely audible and somehow very human. "Tell me," he said. Harry told him. Short version, complete version, everything from the activation of the monitoring to the final chamber to Quirrell on the floor. He didn't dramatize. He told it the way he told things, facts in order, observations where relevant, the conclusion. Dumbledore listened without interrupting. When Harry finished, the old man was quiet for a long moment. "The mirror," Dumbledore said. "The stone." "Still there," Harry said. "The enchantment held. He never reached it. And you made physical contact with Quirrell." "The sacrifice magic activated," Harry said. "I thought it would." "You thought," Dumbledore said, with a very faint echo of Daphne's earlier tone. "Very fairly," Harry said. Something happened in Dumbledore's eyes, the specific thing that was his real reaction when something caught him entirely unprepared, before the response was shaped. It was, Harry thought, something very close to wonder. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "In the years I have taught and known young people, I have encountered perhaps 4 who made that kind of decision in that kind of moment with that quality of certainty." He paused. It is not recklessness. I want to be clear that I know it is not recklessness. I know you know, Harry said. Your friends, Dumbledore said, looking at Daphne and Tracy. They are both remarkable. Yes, Harry said. They are. Daphne's expression received this with the composure she brought to important things, accepting it without performance, without deflection. Tracy said, tell him I decoded Snape's logic puzzle in 4 minutes. She decoded the logic puzzle in 4 minutes, Harry said. Severus will be insufferable about that, Dumbledore said, which was the most unexpected thing he'd said all year, and it made Tracy laugh, a real exhausted laugh, and the sound of it in the quiet corridor was one of the better sounds of the night. Dumbledore moved the stone the next day. He wouldn't tell Harry where, which Harry accepted, because there were some things that were properly secret and this was one of them. The stone's location being known to anyone, including Harry, was a risk that didn't serve anyone. What Dumbledore did tell him, Quirrell would be taken to St. Mungo's for specialist care. The possession had done damage that ordinary magic couldn't quickly repair. Whether Quirrell would recover enough to resume any kind of normal life was not certain. Harry thought about this and felt something he hadn't expected to feel, which was a complicated sorrow for a man who had been, essentially, a victim of the same thing Harry was still figuring out how to finish. He made choices, Daphne said, when Harry mentioned this, on the first morning of the new year in the window alcove with the snow outside thick and genuine. He went looking for Voldemort. He chose that. He did, Harry agreed. But he thought he was in control of something that no one could control. That's a mistake, not a character defect. He paused. Or it's both. People can be both. Daphne looked at him. You feel sorry for him? Yes. Even though he threatened me. He threatened you on Voldemort's instruction, not his own initiative. Harry paused. Which doesn't make it acceptable. But it contextualizes it. She was quiet for a moment. You are very strange, Potter. Third time, Harry said. Still true. But she said it differently than the first 2 times. The same words, different warmth underneath them. Not the cautious assessment of September or the more considered version of October, something else, something that had arrived by degrees and was now simply present. Harry looked at her. The New Year's light was thin and white on the snow outside, and in it she looked like herself, the version of herself that existed in the alcove, the version without the composed surface, not vulnerable, not softer, just more entirely real. The abeyance, he said. She met his eyes. I'm not asking you to resolve it, he said quickly. I'm not, this isn't a pressure. I just want to know how you are with it. All of it. This year. She was quiet for a moment that stretched to several moments. Harry waited, because he was good at waiting and because this was one of the things actually worth waiting for. My father writes every week, she said. About the arrangement. About how I've complicated things. She looked out the window. He doesn't ask how I am. He asks about the declaration and what I intend to do about it. I know, Harry said. I intend to do nothing about it, she said, and there was something in her voice that was both very quiet and entirely definite. I intend to continue exactly as I am. I intend to finish this year, and come back next year, and the year after, and do what I came to this school to do. She paused. I intend to stop being a piece on other people's boards. You've been doing that since September, Harry said. I know. She almost smiled. I'm declaring an intention. It's different from doing it. Doing it felt like, she paused, looking for the word. Like the first morning in the common room. The tea. The silence. Just being somewhere that wasn't managed yet. She looked at him directly. You gave me that. Before you gave me the declaration, you gave me a morning that wasn't managed. Harry held her gaze. I want to give you a lot more mornings that aren't managed, he said. That's all I want. Whatever shape it takes. Something moved in her expression, the foundations showing, the deliberate transparency of someone who had made a decision at the level where decisions are permanent. I know, she said. I know that's all you want. She stopped. Started again. That's why the abeyance is ending. The snow outside was very still. Ending, Harry said. Not today, she said. Not now. But soon. She looked at him with the specific look that he'd been learning all year to read correctly, the one that wasn't composed, that was simply her, direct and real and choosing. I want it to be my choice. Properly. Not a legal instrument. Not protection. Just a choice I make because it's what I want. Then take the time you need, Harry said. I know. She turned to look at the window again. Cornwall, she said. This summer. Cornwall, Harry said. Bring the nimbus. The cliffs high enough to fly from. I will, Harry said. And that was that, and it was enough, and it was more than enough, and Harry looked at the snow and thought about a kitchen full of people and thought that the mirror had shown him something true. Term resumed on the 7th of January with the noise and complication of 500 students returning to a castle that had spent a week in contemplative quiet. The contrast was vivid, one day still and snow-white, the next a rushing reinstallation of every social dynamic and political geography that had been suspended for Christmas. Neville arrived on the platform with new robes and an air of someone who had spent the holiday being thoroughly managed by a formidable grandmother and had emerged from it with renewed appreciation for his own agency. He found Harry in the entrance hall and said, "Gran wants to meet you at Easter." She said, and I'm repeating this as accurately as I can, any 11-year-old who has the good sense to end up in Slytherin and still be a decent person is worth meeting. That's very specific praise, Harry said. It's the highest form she offers, Neville said earnestly. I want you to know that. Tell her I look forward to it, Harry said, and meant it. Hermione came back with 4 new books she'd found in Muggle London, 2 of which turned out to be more relevant to magical theory than most wizarding texts because they approached the same problems from outside the existing framework. She brought them to the library on the second day back and showed Harry with the specific delight of someone who has found a thing they hadn't known was a thing. Muggle physics, she said, opening to a chapter on wave-particle duality. Look at this. The way light exists in 2 states simultaneously until observed, that's almost exactly what Dumbledore was saying about the mirror. The observed thing becomes fixed. The unobserved thing remains potential. Harry read the chapter. The Schrödinger argument applied to magical artifacts, he said. The stone and the mirror existed in potential until someone specifically not wanting to use it observed it. Yes. Exactly. Hermione looked delighted and then composedly dialed it back to enthusiastic. I think there's a whole body of Muggle theory that wizards haven't incorporated because they dismissed it as non-magical. But magic doesn't care whether you call it physics or charms theory. It's all just rules, Harry agreed. The same rules from different angles. Hermione beamed. You're the only person I've said this to who didn't look at me like I'd suggested something improper. It's a good idea, Harry said simply. Good ideas are good ideas. Ron Weasley, who had returned from the burrow with something restored in him that the first term had slightly eroded, sat down at the library table between them with his transfiguration essay and said nothing for a minute and then said, "Can anyone help me with this? It's been asking about intent visualization and I've read the chapter 3 times and it keeps being dense." Harry suggested. Yeah, Ron said. The key is not to hold the starting state at all, Harry said. Only the end state. The start takes care of itself. Ron read this. That's it? That's the whole thing. Why doesn't the chapter just say that? Because textbooks are written by people who already know the thing and can't remember not knowing it, Hermione said, with the gentle authority of someone who had thought about this. It's a known problem in educational theory. Ron stared at her for a second, then wrote in his essay, and said nothing else for a while, and it was, Harry thought, not friendship yet but the preparation for it, the state before things become named, when they're still just people sitting in a library helping each other with problems and finding that nobody in the room is quite what anyone expected. Snape found Harry on a Wednesday evening in the second week of term. Not the balcony this time. The corridor outside the potions classroom, Snape coming out of his office with a stack of marked essays and stopping when he saw Harry coming from the library. "Potter," he said. "Professor," Harry said. Snape looked at him for a moment. The evaluating quality was still there, it was probably always going to be there, it was simply how Snape looked at the world, but the specific weight it had carried in September, the frost of it, had changed temperature. "I've been informed," Snape said, with the specific care of someone choosing words like they were being selected from a limited budget, about the events of December 28th. He paused. "By Professor Dumbledore. Who described the sequence in some detail." "All right," Harry said. "I have also been informed," Snape continued, with an expression that was doing something complicated, "that Miss Davis decoded the logic potion puzzle in 4 minutes. "Yes," Harry said. "That puzzle," Snape said, "has a minimum intended solve time of 20 minutes for the grade level it was calibrated for." "She's very good at logic," Harry said. "She is," Snape said. "As, apparently, are you." A pause. "The protective magic. The application of it." "Intent magic," Harry said. "Like my mother's." Snape was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "Like Lily's." He said the name like it had weight, like he was carrying it carefully. "She could do things with intent-based magic that no one I've known before or since has managed. The specific quality of her focus." He looked at Harry. "You will be more powerful than I thought in September. I want you to know that I am aware of this and that my awareness does not include any impulse to manage or limit it." Harry looked at him. "That's very direct." "You've established that you prefer directness," Snape said. "I adapt to my students when they merit it." "Thank you," Harry said. "For that and for the watch you've been keeping all year." Snape's expression did something that was not quite an acknowledgement and not quite a dismissal, something in between that was its own language. "The potions essay," he said. "Due Friday. The section on base component interaction. Your draft was technically correct but shallow. You're capable of more." "I know," Harry said. "I'll add the intention analysis." "Do," Snape said. And walked away with his essays, which was both a conclusion and, Harry understood, the closest thing to a warm exit that Snape was likely to produce. The Wisengamot notification arrived on the 14th of January. It was official ministry post, sealed 3 times with different colored wax, addressed to Lord Harry James Potter, head of the most ancient house of Potter, the first time that title had appeared on anything addressed to him, the first time the full weight of it had been made legal official on a piece of ministry parchment. It announced that the House of Potter's formal re-registration had been accepted, that the Wisengamot seat associated with the Potter estate had been placed in trust pending his majority but that a junior observer status was available for young heirs, and that a formal meeting with the Office of Magical Inheritance would be required before the Easter break. Harry read it twice and then passed it to Daphne, who read it once and handed it back. "Lord Potter," she said. "Not yet," Harry said. "Full status at 17. But officially registered." "Yes." Daphne was quiet for a moment. "Lucius Malfoy is going to have very strong feelings about this." "He's been having strong feelings about me since November," Harry said. "They haven't moved me yet." "This is different," she said. "The Malfoy family's position in the Wisengamot depends partly on the absence of certain other houses. Houses that used to balance them and that went quiet after the war." She looked at him. "The Potter seat is one of those houses." "I know," Harry said. "That's partly why I filed the re-registration paperwork in December." He paused. Sharp Claw helped me identify which actions would have structural effect. The seat registration was high on the list. Daphne looked at him with the evaluating expression, the one that was always recalibrating. You've been doing this all year, she said. Not just reacting. Building. Both, Harry said. You can't only react. You'll always be behind. She was quiet for a moment. You're meeting with the inheritance office at Easter. Yes. I'd like to attend, she said. In the context of the declaration. It would be appropriate for the declared party to be present at a formal house registration. It establishes, Daphne, Harry said. She stopped. I'd like you to come, he said. Not because it's strategically appropriate. I'd like you there. She looked at him. Both are true, she said. Both are true, he agreed. She went back to her reading. But the corner of her mouth did the thing it sometimes did, the controlled thing, and this time she didn't control it all the way. February arrived with the particular quality of a month that exists primarily to demonstrate that winter is still entirely operational and not interested in reassurances about spring. The castle was cold in the genuine way now, not dungeon cold but all the way through cold, the kind that lived in the stone and came out at you from the walls. Harry was in the Quidditch pitch at 5 in the morning again, but not flying, sitting on the bottom stand in the dark with a warming charm on his robes and a notebook in his hand, the green leather one from Daphne's Christmas gift. He wrote in it rarely, but when he did he wrote things that didn't fit into the organized filing of his thinking, the things that were more feeling than fact and therefore needed a different kind of storage. He wrote, "The mirror shows the kitchen but the kitchen already exists in parts. It's in the alcove and the early morning tea and the chess game in the underground and the way Tracy says obvious things like they're revelations and the way Neville laughs when he hasn't expected to. The mirror shows what I want and I'm building what I want and they're the same thing," slowly. He looked at what he'd written. Then he wrote, "Voldemort wanted to live forever. He took everything human out of himself trying to do it and ended up with nothing to live as. That seems like important information." He closed the notebook. The sky above the pitch was doing the preliminary work of becoming light, not dawn yet, not even close, but the dark had moved from black to the dark blue that meant morning was committed even if it wasn't here. The castle behind him had its windows beginning to warm. The grounds were white and still. The trapdoor to the pitch stairs opened and Daphne sat down beside him. Same green cloak. Breath making the same small clouds. She looked at the notebook in his hands with a single glance that didn't ask anything. "Early," he said. "It's becoming a habit," she said. "Cold," he said. "I have a warming charm." "Efficient," he said. She looked at the pitch for a moment, then at the sky. They sat in the comfortable silence that had been building since September, the one that had the quality now of something that didn't need anything from either of them except presence. "I've written to my father," she said. Harry looked at her. "I told him," she said, with the even precision of someone delivering information that has been considered carefully, that the abeyance was not a temporary state and that I would not be discussing the Malfoy arrangement at Easter or at any other time. I told him that the declaration is formally registered with Gringotts and that I have made my intentions known to the relevant parties." She paused. "I told him that the Greengrass family's decision about its alliances was its own business but that my future was mine." Harry said nothing for a moment. "How do you feel?" She looked at the sky. "Like I've jumped off something," she said. "And I'm still in the air. The landing hasn't happened yet." "It'll be all right," Harry said. "You don't know that." "No," he said honestly. "But I'll be there for the landing either way." She looked at him. The sky was turning the specific shade of dark blue that was almost gray, the minute before the first real light. "I know," she said. And then, quietly, in the way that the most important things were said in the alcove and on the pitch and in the early morning when there was no one to perform anything for, "That's why I jumped." The first light came over the castle turrets, thin and gold, catching the frost on the pitch in brief fire. Harry looked at it. Beside him, Daphne looked at it too. Neither of them said anything else, because nothing else was required, and the morning came on around them in the way that mornings do, unhurried, inevitable, entirely indifferent to whether you were ready for it, and entirely beautiful anyway. The last day of term, before the Easter break, Harry stood in the entrance hall with his bag and his nimbus, and Tracy was hugging Daphne goodbye because Daphne was going home, not for the Malfoy arrangement conversation, because that was dead, but because her grandmother was ill and the family needed her there, and her composure was present, but it was the thinner version, the version she wore when things were costing her something. She found Harry while Tracy was occupied with her own trunk. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks, Harry said. You'll be at Hogwarts? And Gringotts, he said. The main vault. Easter Saturday. She nodded. Right. Yes, he said. She looked at him with the look that wasn't the composed one. The declaration, she said. I want it on record. She stopped. Started again. I want it known that I'm not in abeyance because I'm uncertain. I'm in abeyance because I wanted it to be real. She held his eyes. It's real. I know, Harry said. It's been real since the train. Something moved in her expression, everything moved in it, briefly, all the things she kept organized and contained, and then she composed it again, but not all the way, not back to the surface version. Cornwall, she said. Cornwall, he said. She left. Harry watched her go through the great oak doors with Tracy beside her, and then turned back to the entrance hall, which was full of students and noise and the specific chaos of term ending, and stood in the middle of it and felt the shape of the year around him, everything that had been built and everything still to build, and the fact that both of those things were, for the first time in his life, genuinely his. Neville appeared at his elbow. Train's loading, he said. You're definitely staying? Definitely, Harry said. Right. Neville looked at him with the expression he got when something was important and he wanted to say it correctly. This year was, he said. I mean. It was a lot. It was, Harry agreed. And next year is going to be more. Probably. And the year after that. Almost certainly, Harry said. Neville nodded, apparently having made some kind of internal resolution. I'm glad we're friends, he said, with the direct honesty of someone who had stopped being embarrassed by true things. You know. Since the toad. Harry looked at him. Since the toad, he said. Me too, Neville. Neville went to the train. Harry stood in the emptying entrance hall and thought about the year, the hat and the declaration and the alcove and the chess game in the dark and the red eyes in the final chamber and Daphne on the Quidditch stand in the frost saying that's why I jumped. He thought about Snape saying like lilies about the magic in his blood. He thought about Dumbledore's face when Harry said he'd seen a home in the mirror. He thought about the notebook in his bag, and the sentence he'd written at 5 in the morning, I'm building what I want and they're the same thing, slowly. The entrance hall was empty now except for him. He picked up his bag. He had a week before the Gringotts meeting, a week of the empty castle and the library and the pitch and the early mornings, and then Easter and the main vault, and then the rest of term, and then summer. Cornwall. He walked back into the castle, into its old stones and its patient magic, and the doors closed behind him with the sound of something that had seen centuries of this, of young people walking in and becoming themselves, and had found, in 900 years, nothing more interesting to witness. Harry walked down the corridor toward the Slytherin dungeons, and the castle's torches lit ahead of him as he went, one by one, as though it was showing him the way.